Give Matt the cue when you're ready, Doug.
All right, we have 6 attendees. Go.
All right, good morning, and thank you very much for joining us at the inaugural Sustainability Summit. Our very special thanks go to Day and Nite's COO, Mike Berman, for assembling this esteemed group, and Total Food Service for doing this in joint, and to each of you again for a huge impact on the world we live in. Few housekeeping items. We felt it important that this inaugural summit be in person, but with the looming Delta variant, made a conscious decision post-Labor Day that being in a large group probably wasn't the safest way to assemble. So again, appreciate everybody doing this online. Rest assured, we'll do everything in our power, and it looks as though the world's moving in a direction where we will actually be able to be in person the next time we gather. The purpose, the objective of us getting together is to ensure that each attendee is empowered with actionable, results-driven next steps. Each of you are thought leaders in the space. Each of you show up every day, evidenced by being here this morning. And again, what we've assembled is 3 sessions. Those 3 sessions, I'll start in reverse order. The first one being food waste realities and best practices. The second session is green in a new world of clean. And then the first session, localizing global sustainability. When we think about localizing global sustainability in the industry that we all love and appreciate and put our lives into, thinking larger globally, but what we can do and what we do each day. Reported yesterday in the New York Times, wildfires used to burn 500,000 acres a year. That was over the majority of the 20th century. 500,000 acres a year is about half the size of the state of Rhode Island. 2 years ago in California alone, there were almost 2.5 million acres burned. Close to 5 million acres throughout the country. This past month, the West Coast was on fire, the East Coast was underwater. In California alone this year, there's over 1 million acres burned. We're talking about almost the state of New Jersey in less than 2 years that is burned in this country. And we have very substantial aspects of where the world is headed that we're not able to do anything but be a part of, but ultimately identify solutions. Crypto, some of us are invested in crypto. Some of our businesses are finding ways to use blockchain. When we think about Bitcoin in and of itself, it burns more, it consumes more electricity on an annual basis, the miners of Bitcoin, than the country of Chile. It's not going anywhere. So what can we ultimately do? Our first session, to be moderated by our favorite editor-in-chief of Total Food Service. I want to hand this one over to you, Fred Clashman.
Terrific.
Thank you so much for stepping in this morning.
Terrific. Our pleasure. Thanks so much for putting this together. Really appreciate it. So this is really an interesting topic because as we spent the last year and a half, prior to COVID, there was a clear path of green and sustainable. And then all of a sudden, and I remember we talked about this, the conversations I had with Matt and Mike over the last year and a half, we seem to move to something I would call clean and safe for obvious reasons. So it made me start wondering, how do we get back to green and sustainable again? And what are some of the steps that we need to begin with? And certainly things like environmental issues, corporate responsibility, that stuff, it's out there on the horizon. But the real question is, what can we do locally? What steps can we take today to begin down this path again that's so important? So it's not only a large entity, large government, large company issue, it's a local business, our restaurants, our healthcare facilities. How can we begin? What can we do? So I thought a really good place to start would be, as I've always done since I was a little kid, was go to the dictionary and let's kind of redefine what sustainability is for our industry. And so I think what I came up with was it's operating in a way that protects, preserves, or restores the natural environment, promotes social equity, enhances the lives of the people who work with us and who we serve, and then the communities, and it contributes to the economic prosperity, obviously, of the communities that we work within as well, and our shareholders and our stakeholders, if you will. So as I went searching for where we begin with this, I came up with a simple agenda. And I think the agenda is, how do we operate every day? Well, we begin in the kitchen. And so some of the questions that go with that were, could we invest in energy efficient appliances as we reopen our kitchens and get back to business? Could we reduce our water usage? Then it moves to the menu. Could we minimize food waste, which is always a hot topic, both from a P&L and an environmental standpoint. Then I thought about, every day we typically get a delivery from Cisco or US Foods or whoever our distributor is. Is there a way that we could restructure with them how we ship food every day? That goes from carbon footprint to again, back into waste. Then I thought about, how do we actually serve when we get into our dining rooms? And so there's things like, are there eco-friendly disposables that we could be using? Are there eco-friendly cleaning products that we could be using, et cetera? What kind of steps can we take as an industry today to begin down this path? So with that in mind, it's a pleasure to introduce our first panel of the day, Localizing Global Sustainability, which to me means, how do we start at home and how do we start today? So this was picked as a lead off because it's the meatiest topic, and I think it's one that we can move on immediately. So we're truly honored to have an all-star panel today, and I can't wait to get their insight. Andrew Riggi is the executive director of the New York City Hospitality Alliance. He's going to be joining us shortly. Rajiv Narula is a professor in Canton in upstate New York. He also has an interesting project of living. Brandon is a vice president, senior vice president at ABCO, one of our large in New York and also in the Northeast. So I'd like to let's go through the panel. Rajiv, let's start with you. Give me your thoughts on how you define.
Thank you so much, Fred. Thank you so much, Mike, for putting this all together. As Fred introduced me, I teach at the State University of New York in upstate in Canton, a small village very close to Canada. I teach environmental science and I teach chemistry and I teach first-year experienced students. And in environmental science, my major focus is to tie hands-on projects. So there's a question there. Can you list out the names of the panelists, as there was a network disturbance? Okay. So Rajiv Narula, maybe you can see that on the screen. So I really want to do project-based learning for my students so that they have a hands-on experience. And I'll be talking of 3 major projects that I've done in the last, I would say 7 years. So Fred also introduced me as an organizer, and now I'm on the board of directors for the Local Living Venture. It's a grassroots, small, non-for-profit organization that I've been a part of since 15 years now. And basically what we do is help again, small projects that make big impacts, and basically things that you can do at home in your backyard and help. So the one thing that I learned about 15 years ago when I was still living in a rented apartment in Potsdam was composting and simple backyard composting. Well, uh, good for your own economy because you're generating less waste and you're shipping out less waste, but also good for the environment because you're not generating greenhouse gases by shipping that waste, putting it in landfills, but making it into a value added product that you can then use in your gardens, and you don't have to go buy topsoil or fertilizer or stuff like that if you're gardening. But when I joined SUNY Canton, I said maybe we could use that as a project. And luckily, I had a great team of students, very dedicated students. And we started the Environmental Change Organization, a local student club. And then with that and my environmental science class and first year experience class, we met with physical plant, decided on a spot, didn't want to do it didn't want to make it a very complicated project. So all we said was we didn't even start dealing with post-consumer food waste. So we started with pre-consumer food waste, vegetable peels, fruit peels, stuff that is used to make salads, and just shreds and whatnot in the kitchen. Just started collecting that. We used a bunker system, basically got concrete blocks and lined them up, and facilities would start taking all the pre-consumer food waste. We added yard waste to it, so leaf litter and grass clippings and everything. And once a week, somebody from the facilities goes and just tumbles that, just mixes it all up. We made excellent, A grade quality compost in a year. But then while the compost was cooking, the food was the waste was still being shipped because the compost is sitting and cooking. We can't add to it. Easy solution, add another bunker. And so now we have two. And so one cooks and the other we keep piling. We are diverting 350
And
pounds.
hold on a second, stop me 1 sec. What does it cost to operate something like that? I mean, are we talking about a huge investment or?
No.
Okay.
No. So the bunkers cost us $1,000. So Witherby and Whalen is a private company, hardly a mile from campus. So we went and talked to them, and we paid them full price. We didn't want any, we wanted to have a full price because if this were a project that somebody else would need to, start, they would know the full cost price. So $1,000 for three concrete bunkers. So because we have two, and then the middle one we use, so the other one we only needed two. So that was $750. So $1,750 was the overall input cost. Of course, if you add in labor, physical plant is helping us, right? For them, it's a big thing because we are making compost, and that is saving the campus a lot of money. We are not shipping out waste. That saves us anywhere between $6,000 to $8,000 a year because we divert about 350 pounds of pre-consumer food waste a week.
And where does the manpower come from? Is
The
it
manpower
existing staff, or does it create new jobs?
It did not create new jobs. We wanted to create a new job, but then the pandemic struck, and things are out of place. But anybody who works in the food services at Cheney Dining Hall, we have the special big bins that facilities gave us. We didn't have to buy any special bins. They had those bins. We just labeled it as for compost. That's all the labeling we did. And all they do is, instead of putting all the pre-consumer food waste in a trash bin, they just add it to this bin. And then in the evening, every evening, the facilities person, before leaving his job at 3:30, just comes in and dumps everything into the compost
So
pile.
hold on one second. So Brandon, from a, if a hospital restaurant wanted to execute a program like this, are there composting products that are out in the marketplace that could be used to execute this type of thing?
I'm sure that there are. From a distribution perspective,
Yeah.
we're not exactly in the space of the
Okay.
material aspect of that. We're a lot more on heating, ventilating, air conditioning, and refrigeration products, refrigerants, accessories. However, when it comes to the mechanical contractor community and what they need to have access to in terms of installation accessories, there's many different facets and avenues on the distribution side to seek out product like that. And in a green space, there's definitely some niche distributors in the marketplace that are looking to dive more into that space, into the composting space, and the recycling, reclaim space. When you get into building efficiency and operation, wastewater and gray water recycling, rainwater recycling, there's a lot of things that go into that, where there's many different strategies on the operation side, where what Rajiv is talking about can be very, very much used with casting a wide net to not only have just a real composting strategy, but a reclaim and recycling strategy as well.
All right, so talk about that, because the goal of this is I want people to be able to walk away and have a three-legged stool, if you will, for how to execute a program like this. So Rajiv has brought up the bunker idea and the compostability idea. What's the next piece of this?
So I can chime in.
Go ahead, please.
So Watertown Daily Times reported our students and this project's success. And then I'm also on the village. We have the village of Canton has a sustainability panel, and I'm part of that. And so the village got really excited and said, how can we bring this up to the village level? So the next higher level, because, you know, I was doing this at home. I don't even throw away one leaf. You know, everything gets composted. Kitchen waste gets composted. My next big thing was here at campus, and that was a huge success. And so the village got really interested. So again, we shared the blueprint. Easy. You're not doing, it's not rocket science. You know, bacteria break down things. And so what we started doing in the village was we put in two huge again, I forget the name of those things. They're not trash bins, the ones that Casella Waste would give you.
Dumpsters.
Dumpsters, two huge dumpsters. The village put in two huge dumpsters and asked the village residents to bring in all their kitchen waste if they would. And the village also collects leaf litter and yard waste anyways. And then we have another private university in town here, St. Lawrence University. And that has a horse riding program. And so their horses generate a lot of manure. So all of that is now being mixed and composted. And what the village does is it sifts the compost. So beautiful compost is made, again, grade A, good quality. And it puts in a huge mount every year for the village residents to take for free. So that is a service that the village is providing, and the villagers are really, really happy about that. I'm sure that the composting businesses around, or the ones that used to sell us dirt and topsoil, are not too happy about that. But it says you continue to cut out. Is that me? My connection says it's
All right.
okay.
So hold on one second. So Brandon, let's go back in the kitchen for a minute, okay? Brandon, talk about a strat. Where would you begin to build to reignite a sustainable strategy? Would you start with walk-in boxes? Would you start with cooking? Talk a little bit about what you would do. Would you talk about cleaning the air first? What are some of the things that can be done?
So there's a lot of strategies when it comes to building operation with respect to heating, ventilating, air conditioning, and then on the other side with refrigeration. But when we cast a very, very wide net, so where my background exists, primarily on the HVAC side, but do have some experience on the refrigeration side, it really comes down to the operation systems, the tightness of buildings, and that's really from a commercial perspective. So we'll start sort of at the top of the funnel and we'll kind of work our way down to grassroots. But the operation of a building and the energy efficiency of a building, really, it kind of encompasses everything that we've talked about, everything that you've mentioned. It's the air side, it's the water side, the energy consumption, it's controls. You know, what are we doing to monitor and mitigate temperature strategies that ensure not only the correct operation of walk-in boxes, refrigeration systems, but cooling and heating apparatus. And at the commercial level, one of the largest energy drains on a building, or the largest energy source on a building, is what we're doing to comfort heat and comfort cool spaces. So outside of the process element, but what are we doing to keep the temperature at 60, 70, 80 degrees, the humidity levels where we need them to be at? And then what are we doing from an indoor air quality perspective? There was a lot of momentum in the industry many years ago where there was a program created called LEED, you know, and that program itself created a rating system. So we're going to be LEED silver, LEED gold, LEED platinum. And I think the design and the structure of that from the EPA was that this was going to be a way for us to have healthier buildings. We're going to bring in more outside air. We're going to have a lot of fresh air. We're going to have bike racks. We're going to have vegetative roofs. And all of that was a great brainchild to sustainability. But what the resultant of that was is the higher you went on the LEED cycle, you know, gold, platinum, what you ended up with is a tremendous drain on the energy system, because now we're bringing in 30% more fresh air. We need to condition that fresh air. We have to wring the moisture out of it. And depending on the temperate zone you were in, it just had a negative impact to the overall energy benefit of the building, which, you know, gets into carbon footprint emissions and things like that. So taking a look at introspectively all of the systems and how they operate with a building, controls are huge, indoor air quality is huge, but doing the things that are necessary with the least energy impact, and monitoring temperature control, monitoring scheduling, doing things that are not allowing a system to
And definition of
wild.
energy, definition of energy is cost of this energy.
It's
Correct.
cost of the energy and volume of consumption.
Okay.
So the energy coming from a power plant, so to speak, those power plants right now, by and large part, are driven by natural gas production. Natural gas is starting to have its place in the market, where people are starting to recognize that it is not exactly the cleanest energy that it has billed to be. It's a very dirty power when it comes to emissions and greenhouse gases and carbon footprints and things of that nature. And so there's a strategy when it comes to New York State where we're looking at 80% emission reduction by 2050. And that's not just involving commercial building. It's going to go all the way down to the residential level. So that's kind of where we get to that grassroots component. But part of that strategy is it's multi-layered. The first thing is we electrify buildings, we electrify homes, we get more onto the grid, then we take the grid and we green it. So we bring in renewable sources of energy. We bring in solar, we bring in wind, we bring in hydropower, and we get away from the greenhouse gas emission driving power plants that are burning natural gas, coal, things of that nature. New York State just took a nuclear power plant offline. They're going to replenish that with wind and solar to begin with. And that kind of gets to the district level and the community level, a lot of what Rajiv was just talking about. So we take that and we kind of funnel it down to the residential level. All of us are, at some facet or another, homeowners, renters. We live in properties that are utilizing oil, propane, gas, some form of fossil fuel to heat. And there is a growing trend in the marketplace to kind of look at cold climate heat pumps and other types of sources of energy from a heating perspective that are not driven by fossil fuels and natural gas and oil and propane and things of that nature. And so you get into programs where local communities have done district solar. And the big thing with district solar is now we've got a place that we can put solar panels in a spot. We can backfeed the power grid. We can sell that energy to the homeowner without the homeowner actually having to put panels on their homes, though that still is a great strategy. There are ways to tighten the house, insulate ductwork, things of that nature that we do on the commercial buildings, but we take that down to the residential level. The New York State Energy Research and Development Authority has estimated that in order to just hit their goals by 2030, and that's a 40% reduction in greenhouse gases, that they need to install somewhere in the neighborhood of 200,000 cold climate heat pumps in residential homes, single family residential homes per year, in order to meet that energy goal over the next 10 years. That's a tremendous impact in the marketplace, and that's going to impact each and every one of us as we evaluate the spaces that we live in and the spaces that we are confined to. Through COVID, we've all spent a lot of time in our homes. And so now we're looking at
What's
indoor
the
air
cost
quality.
of
We're looking
what's
at
the
filter
cost of
changes.
this cold climate?
So it can vary. And the interesting aspect of this is when you get into the government and policy side of things, the utility companies have all gotten together and put together extremely robust rebate programs. And they start at the residential level, and they're based on the heating volume that your system is able to provide in the home, as long as you are displacing sort of a dirty technology, a dirty power, something that's less efficient. And then over time, that money, and it can be fairly substantial. It gets into, 10,000 BTUs of heat could be worth, upwards of $3,000 to $5,000. And that, many times over, you're getting systems paid for, and it's almost including the installation cost for the homeowner. So it's really a very low lift to get there. But when you start to look at some of the other programs that are available with district solar, and now the state looking at wind generation and hydro generation, all of that kind of gets into this multi-layered strategy that when you look at the commercial building, it's major mechanical systems. It's what can we do to decrease the energy footprint. But when we get right down to the homeowner level, what are we doing to renovate, to continue to get off of the dirty aspect of natural gas, propane, oil, and get into a greener, more sustainable energy source on the renewable side, and then green the grid by adding more homes with cold climate heat pumps and things of that nature. That's kind of the marketing the marketing buzzword right now is cold climate heat pump. There's a Northeast Energy Partners that have put together a list of products that are all approved on that list. So brand agnostic, technology forward, there's hundreds upon hundreds of systems that qualify, and those systems that qualify trigger the rebate benefits on the homeowner side. When you get into the commercial aspect, there's substantially more dollars that are available when systems need to be serviced, replaced, and things of that nature, where they're more of a custom approach, where you take the energy model of a building, you compare the energy model of a building as it is today to what the system is going to be going forward. And some of those rebates are upwards of 70 to 80% of the cost of the equipment, or 70 to 80% of the cost of the installation, depending on how efficient the system is. So we're getting into a point where, from a homeowner or a building owner and a landlord perspective, we're getting into some real dollars from the utility companies to generously offset the first cost of getting this product into place, and then the operational savings over a 3 to 5, maybe even an 8-year payback period is what we're looking at. And if you're looking at holding on to a space for more than that time, you end up cash positive at those points.
And if you're a restaurateur that's visiting with us today, do you call a service company like a day? And we're not doing ads today, but I mean, where do you begin? Where do you start?
Very much through the mechanical service aspect of whomever you're working with. And Day and Nite's a great example, but companies like that specialize very much in understanding not only the systems that are working in those spaces, but alternatives that are available when upgrades or renovations or changes need to happen. They become experts, and they rely on other experts within this marketplace, those that are working with consulting engineering firms, architects, those that are working towards maybe passive buildings and things of that nature. There are many experts inside this industry that can be looked upon and leaned on for information, so that we're making informed decisions. And that's another component to this, is the education aspect. This isn't an overnight solution. This isn't going to be like turning on a light switch. Everybody needs to spend time and really learn and understand what their specific impact in the marketplace is. At the same time, the systems that they're operating, how clean, how dirty might they be? What are the strategies that they could do to maybe just retro commission controls? It's a very easy aspect to it, making sure that we're doing the things that we need to do to set back temperatures in the middle of the night when nobody's occupying the space, control to a tighter temperature range in the occupied times, clean the air a little bit better, make sure we have proper air changes for, to avoid sick building syndrome and things of that nature. But every step of the way, there are always experts that can be relied on, starting with right down to the mechanical service level, right to the piece of equipment. There are experts that look at those things every day, and they can advise on what are the next best steps, for those that are unassuming and then can spend time educating themselves.
So what happened
move that ball forward
over the last year and a half in that space? Did that space go to sleep for a year and a half, given the focus that was on clean and sustainable, or has that been active?
That space has been extremely active. So
Okay.
from the design side, from the mechanical side, from the manufacturer's perspective, there's been a heavy presence, especially in our market,
Yeah.
with COVID and things of that nature. You have a lot of eyes on what are we doing to clean the air better? What are we doing to measure indoor air quality? But things that go along with measuring indoor air quality start to touch in what are we doing for controls? Controls start to touch us into what are we doing mechanically for comfort heating, comfort cooling? What are we doing mechanically for
Yeah.
blast coolers, freezers, walk-in boxes, kitchens, things of that nature? You know, hood control. What are we doing to replace the outside air that the hood is pulling out of the kitchen, and where are we bringing that fresh air from? And are we treating it? Are we conditioning? Are we making sure that we're not bringing in too much? You know, are we positively pressurizing spaces that need to be positively pressurized? Are we taking control of that? So all of those discussions have been happening. And while some of the spaces have been largely unoccupied, what's been happening behind the scenes is, from the engineering community perspective, is they've been diving into understanding what can we do to have tighter control of systems? What can we do to not oversize systems? That's another a huge faux pas in the industry, is that for the last 15 to 20 years, and even prior to that, the law of large numbers, and a system might need 10 tons, but we'll put in 12. We'll make sure we have enough. Now we've got comfortability and confidence in system design and system management, that if we know we need a specific capacity, we could size the system right for that capacity and know that that's exactly what we're going to get. Maybe that wasn't there 15 to 20 years ago, but now it is. And that tighter control and that tighter tolerance.
So no more
system
one size
design,
fits all.
That's true. And painting with a very, very broad brush, 15, 20 years ago, that was okay. That got people by. But now a lot of what the utilities are looking for is they're saying, okay, if you only need a certain amount of capacity, why are we oversizing a system? And safety factors and things of that nature are not really part of that conversation anymore, because we don't need that. We've got tighter control.
Okay. Rajiv, a couple of questions came up. I saw your answer, but I want you to share the answer. And I knew this would happen. When you live in New York, you have upstate with the farm and the cows, and Buffalo, and then you have this thing called New York City. So one of the questions is, hey, this sounds great, but Canton could be a little bit of a rural area, and you've got sort of unlimited land to do this. What happens when you move this bunker thing into an urban execution? What does that look like? Can it be done?
So Denmark has the answer. Denmark has done several projects in cities where the waste is segregated on point. It's not after the fact. So the people are educated. You put compostables in a separate thing. You put, of course, we are recycling now, but then again, our system got screwed up thanks to China, who was accepting all our recyclables together, and they had the factories to sort them out. And now we don't want to sort things out. And I was reading something in New York Times the other day. But so segregation on point at the source. And if you segregate that, and then there's those special trucks that take it outside of your city and compost it where land is available. Or if the city has some open land that is of no good use, make it into a composting facility. It does not stink. So just FYI, it's an aerobic composter. It does not stink. It does not generate methane, which is a powerful greenhouse gas. So it stops from doing that. So it's good. If somebody would like, actually better than composting would be to set up an anaerobic digester facility. You put everything in a closed tank.
Hold on. Say it slowly. Anaerobic digester facility.
Anaerobic digester facility.
What is that?
That's what my PhD was on at Clarkson. So you put anything that can get composted into a big tank with no air or limited air, or you're not feeding in air. It's a closed tank. And then the bacteria act on the stuff and make methane, which is a horrible gas. But methane is also a good gas if it is trapped, and it can be sent into a pipe and burned to make energy. So that's your energy product. And the composting process is a little slower because, this set of bacteria are a little different. They take their time, but then whatever gunk is left is good quality compost.
Good gunk.
So good gunk. Yeah.
Good gunk.
Good gunk. So Denmark again is the leader there. India does small level anaerobic digesting facilities in villages. So where, cow manure and daily kitchen waste goes into a small tank, which is buried close to your home. So then there is a pipeline that comes in and you can use that gas for either cooking or heating. But that's a village level, small level, but you can do it at a larger level as well. So either composting or anaerobic digestion.
So Brandon, do you think Rajiv's ideas are nuts? And Rajiv, do you think Brandon's ideas are nuts? No, it's important though, because we're really coming at this from two different angles. Are these compatible concepts and compatible strategies?
They're completely on the opposite ends of the spectrum, but
Yeah.
I believe that in between all of this, and both are very valid, I think this speaks to, when we start talking about localizing global sustainability, it really speaks to there's not one solution that's going to fix everything. It is many different, it's like a puzzle piece, right? It's many different pieces that all fit together, and maybe two pieces on the opposite ends of the puzzle don't exactly go together, but they're interconnected by many other different components that when you bring it all together, that picture that you're looking at is now complete. And the completeness of that picture is everything that we touch, we have an opportunity to create an efficiency around it. So when we talk about food storage and food waste and composting and things of that nature and what's being done. And then you get all the way into the energy side.
Right, yep.
Correct. No, and you get into the entire spectrum of what are we doing every day that consumes something, whether it's energy, waste, byproduct, whatever, and how can we minimize our impact on the environment, whether that be from a gas emission, whether that be from a waste emission or a waste product or things of that nature, and how do we combine all that together into a multifaceted solution that then is a blueprint for others to pick up on. So maybe exactly how we're talking about it today isn't the exact methodology 2, 3, 4 years from now. But if we don't take a look at trying to implement some of these strategies at the local level, at the individual level, and then kind of expanding it from there and let it grow, we're never going to find harmony 3 to 5 years from now if we don't try today by doing something.
So as soon as you go into 2 or 3 or 4 years out, what are the politics of this? What was life in the Trump administration? Did it have one look at this? And now does Biden in a return to Paris Accords, and does that change how we look at this politically? And as we live every day, should we be looking at what our local government's doing and what kind of commitment there is? Left, right, whatever it is, it's common sense. How do you balance it?
I would say don't even worry about the politics.
Okay.
Do whatever you have to do, and then keep writing petitions. That's what my class does. We find petitions, we write petitions, we'll do our work. But our composting facility didn't stop in Trump administration. It's not stopping in the Biden administration. Personally, let's start personally. And yes, it's good that we have the Paris Accord. It's good that we have things, but I was concerned when we signed out of the Paris Accord, but I also wrote on Facebook, and I said, if each one of us follows the Paris Accord, why do we even need a government to say yes or no to it? Right. So I believe in people power more than anything. And then finally
government intervention. And
well, yes. And finally, I think that there was a video I once watched, which has always stuck with me. And a little side note, Obama was speaking against LGBTQ issues long ago, because the whole country was like that. And then when he saw that the country has changed, he changed. Yep. So we are the ones that will be directing the change. It's not going to come top to bottom, it's going to go bottom up.
Yesterday I was reading a story in a Boston paper about the state of Massachusetts looking at a change in the bottle bill once again, which brings up this whole question of plastics and disposables, et cetera. where are we? What should we be thinking about? What are some of those issues as they relate to what we can do locally? Want to talk about that for a sec, Rajiv?
Um
Does that?
yes, I was actually reading the question and answers.
Yeah. Sorry.
So what so more than just this, what else can be done locally was your
In
question?
terms of where are we with plastic right now? What should the attitude be towards disposables, biodegradables, et cetera? Where does that fit?
So the good news is that even though it's slow, but biodegradable plastics are the next thing that's coming. A lot of people in the village have already started buying those products, right? But where we are now, I'm glad that New York State banned single-use plastic bags. I'm very, very happy about that. The big question that a lot of people posed in discussions here on the Sustainability Council in the village was what do we do with, the village was going to go even a step further and asking Walmart to not even sell disposable trash bags because people started using them, smaller trash
Right,
bags.
right.
So how do you deal with dog poop? How do you deal with that? And then I never raised a dog here in US, but I had a dog in India and it was very different there. But people said, ask your grandmother.
Ask your grandmother.
Ask your grandmother.
I like
So
that.
if you have a dog, make sure that lifestyles will need to change. It's not that the dog needs to go out from 4 to 5 and then poop in somebody's yard and you have to pick up that poop. Teach the dog that you'll poop at a certain time and you'll be here and we have a scoop and everything and we'll scoop it up. And just in case you go outside or something, there are products you can carry in your pocket where you can scoop it up and dispose it off somewhere. And then the village will be putting other bins and
What about bottles? I mean, in our industry, is a tremendous amount of plastic bottles. What do you see with that?
I want to live in a time where holding a plastic bottle, well, this is not one,
Yeah.
where holding a plastic bottle will be a matter of shame. I want to live in a time if you see somebody holding a plastic bottle, they'd be like, oh my God,
Yeah.
How horrendous of you.
Like smoking a cigarette in the middle of a room.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And
All right.
that's how I educate my students. And, if the students are, if you tell them that your water costs more than more than gasoline, right? And yes, it's convenient, but look at where you're investing your money in, or look at where you're putting your money in. And then it's not even good water. If you watched Tapped, there's a movie called Tapped. If anybody's watched that, you'll know the logistics of how bad these bottling companies are and the industry.
Thanks, Rajiv. I want to welcome Andrew Riggi, who's joining us, who's the executive director of the New York City Hospitality Alliance. Thanks, Andrew. And again,
well, thank you. I'm sorry.
Nothing to be sorry about. I'm glad you could join us, and thanks for an incredible year and a half of helping this industry stand on its feet once again. Amazing. Thank you. Thank you. So, question for you is, where does sustainability? We opened with the question. We went from green and sustainable pre-COVID to clean and safe during COVID. How do we get back on a agenda, and how are your members getting back on an agenda of looking at clean and sustainability as important to what they do every day?
Yeah, I think, listen, first off, like you said, pre-pandemic, there was a lot of focus on sustainability. I think what sustainable meant kind of changed a little bit throughout the pandemic. And I think it's just going to continue to take more conversations, more people getting into the industry where sustainability is built into their restaurant concept. So it's less of an afterthought or a side thought, and really more of just the ethos of that restaurant and that business. But you'll see today, I think it was in the Daily News, there was another bill that was introduced that would require plastic forks, knives, and cutlery for delivery and takeout to actually be requested by the consumer. It could not just be included. So I think it's going to take a little bit of, like I said, just being built into the ethos and the culture of new restaurants that are opening up, but then also the regulatory framework. When I logged on, I heard you talking about, smoking, and so forth. So I think we're going to see it. Listen, even things like, QR code menus, right? Before the pandemic, there were companies for years trying to get restaurants to use QR code menus. It just never took a
off.
hold.
Yeah.
And now I think it's probably here to stay. They're still at restaurants. So that's one, aspect as well. But again, I think a lot of it also is just as new restaurants open up, you can see how sustainability is built into that culture and the operations of the business. So
if you were gonna open a new restaurant, what are some of the first steps that you would take to execute a strategy like that, to make it part of the culture? Where would you begin?
yeah, I mean, I think all of this, I think looking at things like plastic, looking at all the different types of waste, because, right, it's also a business decision. Think about the money a restaurant spends every year just putting plastic knives and forks in every takeout and delivery bag that ends up in somebody's drawer someplace. So that's a focus. But I think, again, it's not always as easy as it seems, thinking about purchasing locally, and sustainable products, and where are they coming from, but then how are they actually getting to New York City? It's great if you're purchasing organically grown, whatever it is from across the country, but what's the footprint that it has, or the impact on the environment by bringing it here to New York? So these are aspects that I think people really have to think about. Also the types of materials that you're doing in a build out, are they reclaimed? Are they recycled? I think these are parts of your day-to-day operations. Reducing waste. I mean, just thinking about, like, which again, policy is changing, the straws, or you go and you get a cocktail and they put a little plastic, mixing straw, cocktail straw in there. Like, it's not really needed. So again, combination of thinking about your business operations, because often, yes, sustainable practices and products may cost more money, but reducing the usage of other products reduces money. So it may not always be a balance, but long-term sustainability for the industry and for our environment, you got to do it.
Brandon, I have a question. I spent a lot of the last year talking with folks about biopolarization, UV lights, etc. We haven't really discussed how air gets treated today. And Andrew, the same question goes to you. When COVID's over, is that going to be the end of a discussion of air? Are we going to go just back to making sure that the air conditioning works in the summer and the heat works in the winter? Or is there going to be an ongoing discussion about air quality as we go forward? And should there be a conversation?
I think there absolutely should be a conversation that continues forward. I don't see it slowing down anytime soon. I think one of the things that has stemmed from this indoor air quality discussion is visualizing indoor air. So for a long period of time, I think part of the reason why there wasn't a lot of a discussion around it, not that we didn't need a pandemic to force us in that direction, but how do you feel whether or not the air is clean or dirty? You can physically feel whether or not the air is cold or warm, I'm comfortable, I'm uncomfortable, but how do you determine comfortability with air? And what you really need is some type of control component, some type of a visualization that says, here are the volatile organic compounds in your air. Here's the dirty particles that are in your air, and this is how many of them there are. And by employing a filtration strategy or things of that nature, here's how we clean that air back down to a measurable level. So when you talk about UV lighting and needlepoint ionization and bipolar ionization, all of that componentry, that was an immediate reaction to what we had happened to us through the pandemic. But there was still, other than a sticker that you saw on a filter or a sign that somebody put up at a restaurant saying what they were using for filtration, there really wasn't much that was communicated either to the occupant, the owner, the manager on how that particular air was being treated. And I think some of the developments that manufacturers have taken filter manufacturers, some of the controls manufacturers have developed a way to put onto a screen, onto an app on a phone, here's how your air is performing outside of just what you're feeling in temperature. Here's how clean it is. Here's how much is there. Here's what's been done to mitigate what you have in that air. You know, when we had UV lights for a very, very long time, but UV specifically in some of the bands that it was created in really denigrated all of the insulated components that were inside some of the air handlers and products. So if you had a rubber seal, you had a gasket, a UV light would turn that gasket into hard plastic, and then it would crack, and now you'd have air leakage. And so we were doing all these things to, you know, kill whatever we could in that
Right.
airstream, but we were also damaging the inside of the components. So now there's been a lot of things that have been done to get away from that UV band lighting. And if it is UV, it's more of an LED band, but you need a lot of time for that air to be interactive with that UV surface. So now you have needlepoint ionization and things of that nature. But I think part of that discussion
Hold on,
is
back
going
up.
to
Needlepoint
trend towards-
ionization.
Yeah,
What
it's
is
just
that?
a different type of, it's a different type of component that goes inside of your ductwork. There's all the different
Right.
monikers that go along with it. You got LED, you got needlepoint, but what it's really doing is it's either creating some type of hydrogen peroxide or some type of mitigation strategy to deaden a virus cell as it passes through the component. But all of it tends to be external to the airflow so that you don't create an additional energy drain on the system.
Okay.
It's just cleaning the air as it goes forward. But there's many different manufacturers out there that do something similar to that. But I think what it really comes down to is the sensory capability of a controller to be able to pick up what's in the airstream and graphically put that onto a screen from either a thermostat or to your phone app, where you say, okay, even right down to your home level, okay, I have a comfortable home. I also have a clean air home at the same time.
Andrew, is that an issue in restaurants? Are customers still thinking, or are staff still thinking about clean air at this point?
I think so. You know, listen, less than we were at the beginning, but I think it's still important. I think as, you know, more and more people continue to dine indoors, it's something that shows customers that you are going the extra mile to keep them safe. And I think you have to look at everything within the industry. There's going to be different demographics of restaurants where these things are going to be more important. You know, I would not be surprised to go into more fine dining restaurants and see more air filtration systems or other types of restaurants where there is a focus to show you what they are doing versus these things just happening in the background. So
Hygiene theater, it's been called.
yeah. So you know, I definitely think there is you know, there is that interest. I think there'll probably continue to be that interest. But like what I was saying before is, you know, as new restaurants are built out, as new developments go out that are going to house restaurants, how are those developers thinking about all of this? Because yes, there are the portable you know, machines restaurants can use for air filtration. Yes, you can change, you know, the filters. But sometimes, you know, unless things are built into the infrastructure, it's going to be a little bit tougher. But I hope, and I think what I'd like to see is that as there's these additional panel conversations, as there's talks about the industry, you know, everything about sourcing, you know, where are you getting your protein from? Where are you getting your vegetables from? You know, how about your paper goods? Air filtration, air quality becomes part of that conversation. Because I think for the most part, pre-pandemic, if you were to talk about sustainability and health and all of these things, you know, you'd probably talk about, where are you purchasing? Is it organic? You know, is this compostable?
Mm-hmm.
But air was probably a second thought. I think that the pandemic certainly thrust it into the forefront of people's thinking. So, you know, it'll be there, but it's incumbent on everyone to continue to make it to be something important. And the cost, obviously, you know, what is the cost of all of this to small?
The other thing that seems to have exploded all of a sudden is plant-based everything. Where does that, Rajiv, Brandon, where does that fit? I mean, can that make a difference? What impact can that have on what we can do?
I'll let Brandon go first.
I don't have a lot on the plant-based side. I mean, from a materials and manufacturing and the componentry standpoint, there's not a lot really other than packaging material and recyclables and things like that when you deliver product. That's kind of where we would get involved. But on the plant-based side, I see a lot in food production. I see a lot in food consumption. So I think that's probably a space that it's probably going to play a lot more in. On the energy.
And is that
consumption
changing your
side,
mix of products at all, Brandon? Are people looking, do you need a different type of walk-in? Do you need a different whatever?
that hasn't really changed on our side. Maybe the temperature side has changed a bit, but that really is going to get, the bigger things in our industry have always impacted around refrigerant changes. And so when refrigerant changes have happened, that sort of drove, what are we going to do from a piping? What are we going to do from a reclamation strategy standpoint? We're on the comfort heating and cooling side, we're staring down, in a refrigerant change possibly in the next 2 to 3 years, where we're going to go away from R410A to something different, probably an A2L refrigerant, R32B, something like that, where it's just going to require a little bit more tighter control to get that refrigerant in place, but it has significantly far less global warming potential than what R410A has. And we've seen a lot of foreign countries utilize that switch over very effectively.
Terrific. Andrew, thoughts on where we're headed in terms of plant-based and things like that and impact? Because obviously there's a local sustainability impact on that you can create from a menu standpoint.
Yeah, I think we're already seeing a lot more vegetables on menus than we have in the past. Look, you see like 11 Madison Park that's gone plant-based, but then New York Times review, they have the meat room. I think particularly in the US, we are a very meat, driven
Meat-centric
country. Meat-centered. I think it's going to be tough for us to really change too much. But again, going back to like schools, where do people learn their eating habits? And I don't think it's something that's going to change overnight, but I think more plant-based meals in school, kids get used to it and they take these eating habits into their adulthood. It's really important. I think that restaurants should continue to convince people, but I think there is a very uphill climb convincing people that have been eating particularly beef their whole life that vegetables can now be their entree. I think in certain types of cuisines, it's more,
it lends itself to it, right?
But in traditional American cuisine, it's tough. And then you also see, I'm not an expert, but debates about, the different types of plant-based burgers are out there, and really long-term, what is their impact on the environment and what is their impact on health? And I'm not sure if all the science is out there. I don't want to comment because I don't know all the details, but I think it's not fully clear. And then getting people over to the hurdle. Why would I have a plant-based burger versus a
Well, I guess it relates back. What I'm trying to relate back to is Rajiv's opening piece about cows and methane gas and et cetera, and where it kind of fits in the chain. That's sort of where I'm trying to go with it.
Absolutely.
And I don't have an answer to it.
Absolutely. And so this panel has kicked off the day exactly the way we would have expected. Certainly no one could stimulate conversation better than Fred Clashman. We could have gone for hours with this panel, and they set up the rest of the agenda so perfectly because we covered things like indoor environmental quality. We covered things like how to take food waste from the nasty, dirty mess that it is and convert it into something quite useful. We'll be hearing more about that in separate panels. This group was purposefully put together with a wide range of views and expertise represented. When we think of technology and advancements in technology, we tend to think of things like the smartphone, the computer, so on and so forth. But Brandon Bradley's intellect and excellence tells us that there's a heck of a lot of movement and momentum in technologies which we don't know as much about as we should from a sustainability standpoint. On a more practical level, on the more basic community levels, Dr. Rajiv Narula gave us a good sense that we can all take action. We don't need to wait for the Paris Accords. We can do the things practically as individuals and as a community. And although Andrew was not able to get on early to tell the entire story. As always, he puts a great flourish to it. Andrew also redefines sustainability in the most meaningful way. I would be remiss if I didn't note that the sustainability of the entire New York restaurant and bar industry after COVID is thanks to what Andrew did heroically on his own and continues to do to make for the betterment of our industry. And so thank you all for kicking this off exactly the way we would have anticipated. What a wonderful panel. One of the great things about doing virtual programs like this is we can actually globalize local sustainability. We've got participants from the UK, from our next moderator's native country of the Netherlands, as well as across the continent, the United States. Of course, one of the difficult things about technology, as we experienced a little bit during this first session, was that it freezes oftentimes like items maintained in a freezer thanks to the day and night refrigeration expertise. But hopefully that technology glitch will be fixed out in the next sessions going forward. With many thanks to the first panel, I want to introduce our second panel, Green in a New World of Clean. Clearly, COVID is a catalyst, and it puts a spotlight on so many things from surface to air. But it's not just protecting against deadly pathogens. Avoiding the laws of unintended consequences with treatments that will have adverse environmental impact are a major consideration. On the ground, in our packaging, in the air, this diverse panel coming up brings a range of practical, cost-effective solutions. Our moderator, Eric Israel, although he hates when I say this, is a legend in sustainability. Among other things, Eric is the author of the world's first corporate sustainability report done for Royal Dutch Shell. Eric was KPMG's founding sustainability partner, and he was the head of their global practice. Among other things, Eric served as Global Reporting Initiative, GRI's North American Managing Director. There is nobody better equipped to lead our next panel, to introduce our next panel, and to help educate our audience with some of the best, most sophisticated and practical ways to practice clean greenly. So take it away, Eric.
Thank you, Mike. And good morning to all of you. And thank you, Mike, for that introduction. You know, it's my Dutch background that I'm always a little bit humbled. And you know, so I have to get used to this New York environment, which is, you know, not so modest. But that's good because, you know, we are here for a discussion. And I followed the first panel with lots of interest, and there's a lot of good insights there and very good experts. So I want to welcome you to the second panel of the inaugural Hospitality Industry Sustainability and Food Waste Summit. It's the first one. And I'm delighted to introduce to you this panel, which is called Green in a New World of Clean. And I'm honored to moderate this excellent panel of sustainability experts, which I will introduce to you in a moment. So as Mike already said, my name is Eric Israel. I am the co-founder of KPMG's Global Sustainability Services, but also PwC's Conflict Minerals Services. And as a chartered accountant, I started my sustainability career at Royal Dutch Shell. You know, it's one of those Dutch companies that probably everybody knows. And this was in 1997. And my focus was on reporting, and specifically how reporting can be used as a management tool to develop and execute business strategies. And I was listening to the first panel, and Fred came up with a definition of what sustainability is. And I want to share with you a sustainability definition that's very close to my heart, because that's how I interpret sustainability. What does it mean to a business? Sustainability is not a sideshow. It's not something that you just do because it feels good. You do this because there is a business case. And that's why you want to implement that within you, whether you are an oil and gas company or if you're a company in the food sector. Ray Anderson, who was the CEO of Interface, a flooring company in Atlanta, fortunately he passed away, but he described sustainability as follows. And he said, and I just quote him, "We found a new way to win in the marketplace. And that doesn't come at the expense of our grandchildren or the earth, but at the expense of the inefficient competitor." So that's the business case. And I want to, just an example. And I wish I had an example in the food sector, but this is an example that I usually use when I teach sustainability. And this relates to the electric car. And during, nobody knows this maybe, but during the 1990s, it was General Motors who launched the first mass-produced electric car by a major automaker. And they called that the EV1. So this was during the 1990s. However, in 2003, they made a decision and they announced that it was discontinuing that electric car, the EV1. And General Motors recalled and destroyed all the EV1s. They destroyed all their electric cars in 2003. And the same year that General Motors destroyed their EV1, Tesla Motors was founded. That was founded in 2003, when General Motors made that massive mistake. So 6 years later, after 2003, in 2009, General Motors filed for bankruptcy. And it was one of the largest industrial bankruptcies in history. Most people may not know that. The General Motors of today is not the General Motors that started almost 100 years ago. What about Tesla? So General Motors filed for bankruptcy. Tesla is now the leader in electric cars with a market value of close to $800 billion. It's 10 times worth more than General Motors' market value after its bankruptcy. So the only thing I want to mention here, that people understand that sustainable development or sustainability can make or break a company. There is a business reason why you want to do this. So looking back for the business strategy, for every business strategy, reporting is critical. And you can compare reporting to the nervous center of all organizations. It handles all the data to support the organization's vision. So reporting is about data. And a war for data, especially sustainability data, has started. I just want to make you aware that sustainability is not a sideshow. It's at the heart of what's happening in Washington. It's at the heart of what's happening in the United Nations. It's everywhere. And data is necessary. So we see regulators around the world are pushing for mandatory disclosure. That may also affect your sector as well. Investors, such as BlackRock, with almost $9 trillion with assets under management, they view sustainability as an investment risk. You as an entrepreneur should also look into sustainability as a risk, understand the risk, and once you understand the risk, you can turn that into an opportunities. And the economic dangers posed by the transition to a low carbon economy, because that's what we're talking about, make investors and also stock exchanges around the world promote sustainability or ESG disclosures for companies. And look even at the, a very conservative group, the US Business Roundtable. They moved away from shareholders only. And they recently declared the need for corporations to focus on purpose. That's what sustainability is. It's the purpose of a corporation. And purpose means you don't only deliver value to your stakeholders, but your shareholders, but you deliver value to a whole wide range of stakeholders. So that's the introduction. Sustainability is just it's much more. And I know that the previous panel was more local, and now I want to make it more broad. So how sustainable is the food sector? And maybe some of you know that last month it was the United Nations held its food system summit in New York. And they set the stage how successful the food and agriculture companies are on achieving the sustainability development goals, the so-called SDGs. You may have heard of them, but there's a whole agenda set by the United Nations to make sure that we transition in a more sustainable future. So that's reflected in the SDGs. And then based on the first, they made a comprehensive food and agricultural benchmark study, 2021, that they discussed last month at the United Nations in New York. That study was based on, they measured 350 of the most influential food and agricultural companies on their contributions to transforming our global food system. And unfortunately, the results were very poor for the food sector. And whilst pressure on the food sector is mounting to address global challenges, such as we talked a little bit about climate change, hunger. And believe me, hunger doesn't only take place outside of the United States, it's also within our country. And many companies continue to operate business as usual. That's what we see, and are not contributing to achieving the SDG. So I just want to mention this study. If you're interested to see more of the details, it's called the 2021 Food and Agricultural Benchmark Study. And the benchmark study demonstrates that the food sector is, unfortunately, it's not on track for transitioning to a sustainable food system. And these are not my words. This is what comes out of that study. And I will give you a summary of some of the key findings. So the first key finding was food companies are not doing enough to address their environmental impacts. So it's about environmental impacts. Second key finding was most food companies do not have an integrated sustainability strategy. Integrating sustainability within your business strategy. It's not happening in the food sector. Third finding was many food companies are not doing enough to address the climate impact on our food system. We talked a little bit about this during the first panel, but still there's room for improvement here. The fourth key finding is that the food business is performing poorly on critical social issues, including human rights in their operations and supply chain. And last finding is that many companies, they struggle to tackle the nutritional and health challenges. So that's just the state of the art. I can't make it any better. This is just based on facts. So in short, there are worrying gaps in the food sector industry, with respect to its preparedness for climate change. That's one. Second one is progress on environmental impacts, such as food and packaging waste, and contributions to health and social issues, such as food preparations and quality. So now, in this world of clean, what can you do to make green thrive? And Matt Scher, President and CEO of Day and Nite, said it well. I saw that in the program. He said, there doesn't a day come by without hearing from customers about how important innovation and leadership is. And those are the two key words, innovation and leadership. And this is where I want to introduce our expert panel. And I would like to start with Sean first. And what I've asked the panelists, based on their expertise, because they have an expertise in different kind of areas, to describe to you what the trends are that they see, what is happening in the world, but is also impacting the food sector. So let me go to Sean first. Sean Hoyt is a program manager at Con Edison. Thank you. Good to see you, Sean.
Good to see you.
He is responsible for the Small Medium Business Energy Program. He is a program manager, at Con Edison. He's responsible for the Small Medium Business Energy Program. And that program is helping small and medium-sized business owners to achieve gas and electric savings, which is key. In this role, Sean administers almost, I understand, 40 million or maybe more in annual incentives to accelerate the adoption of energy efficiency, reduce energy demand, drive sustainable economic developments, and ultimately support the goals of the New York State Energy Plan to fight climate change. He is an alumnus of the Sustainability Management Program at Columbia University, where he served also as the president of the Sustainability Management Student Association. And in addition, Sean, I understand you are also LEED certified by the Green Building Certification Institute. So, a real expert in the area of climate change. It's one of the areas that this report showed as it's one of the weaknesses currently within the food sector. So let me ask you the question, and then the floor is all yours, Sean. What can you tell us, the audience, what you see as the most important climate change trends for the food sector? And if you have some time also, think about, I'm also interested, not only the trends, but maybe you can also share a couple of words of wisdom, share with this audience how the food sector can innovate to become more sustainable. You hear all those bits and bytes. What can you do? And it's not rocket science, but what can the food sector do to, knowing what the trends are, to innovate and become more sustainable? The floor is yours, Sean.
Thanks for setting the tone, Eric, and great introduction on the topic. The previous panel was great as well, and thank you for having me today. Just want to start off just real quick by setting the stage of what kind of this is and what we do. We operate a relatively large energy delivery system to the 10 million people who live in the 5 boroughs of New York City and Westchester County, serving 3 commodities. We have steam, electricity, and gas. Within the food and agriculture industry is centered around energy, right? From food production and farming to sales and distribution, it all requires a source of energy to thrive, right? So I'll begin with where I sit, which is on the distribution side or the end user, right? And what we're doing to assist the food sector in the energy-related challenges when you think about restaurants, bars, lounges, bakeries, breweries, and hospitality, right? And then expand to the trends I'm noticing upstream within production and farming. So as Eric mentioned, I run the Small to Medium Business Energy Efficiency Program that assists with the adoption of energy efficiency technologies by providing incentives to assist them with upfront costs of upgrading their lighting, refrigeration, HVAC, controls, electrification through heat pumps, and gas measures. In terms of economic drivers, the top 3 critical market segments that collectively account for 1/3 of small business jobs in the United States are warehouses and manufacturing, retail, but that includes grocery stores and grocers, and then restaurants, as aforementioned, right? And they all have very distinct characteristics, which makes it a challenge in approaching them for upgrading or adopting these energy efficiency technologies. For example, within the manufacturing and warehouse sector, and that includes data centers, which is important, and I'll touch on that a little bit later, they're less concerned with the aesthetics, but care about protecting their inventory, equipment, and their servers. For retail, they're extremely concerned with the aesthetics, driving foot traffic through their business so that their business could obtain revenue and drive really their product forward. So aesthetics is a big key driver in the retail industry. In restaurants, they tend to have relatively thin margins, that they're really just trying to stay open. So the energy related upgrades are likely an afterthought unless the business is just starting up. If something breaks or if something triggers a code violation, they have to make that upgrade. This is the case for roughly all small businesses, and this is before COVID. So pre-COVID world, these are the struggles, making the current state of business even more complicated. When you factor in that restaurants use about 5 to 7 times more energy per square foot than other commercial buildings, the cost per square foot of real estate in New York City could be daunting for a small business owner. They're just wondering, now, how am I really going to survive here? Right? I think that what they need to keep at the top of their mind is that energy can play an integral role in helping them succeed. So some innovative trends that I see restaurant companies that they're actually achieving to lower the carbon footprint would be, just really understanding where they stand and helping them understand where their environmental impact crosses with the energy related usage patterns that they may have within the facility. And I'll dive into what that means. I think that really for this market segment or for this actual sector, at least on the distribution side, again, we're thinking about the end users, is having that general awareness, right? Of they have their day to day, that they know objectives they need to achieve, but they're not exactly focusing on these different variables that tap into sustainability. Now, Eric, you mentioned that sustainability is a business case, right? And I agree wholeheartedly. And with the extreme climate disruption, it hurts people with limited incomes the most, right? So the food and agriculture benchmark study that Eric mentioned cites sustainability strategies as a crucial first step, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. I believe that these business or owners should make efficient energy use a business practice so that they can improve their profitability, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and conserve natural resources. And there's simple ways to do this, again, without overthinking. I think that one of the biggest misconceptions is that to be sustainable, you have to do the whole deal, right? You can't just start off small and have that impact, right? So if you can reduce water and conserve, you can reduce energy and save water by simple measures like forced aerators or hydrant spray valves if you're a restaurant. Or, one of the main drivers for food waste is food purchasing and storage, right? So there are measures in refrigeration like Nite case covers that you just pop over your refrigeration at night and it keeps the produce cold. Or automatic door closers if you've ever been in a convenience store. You go on to the refrigerator to pull something out, the door doesn't actually close. So a lot of that refrigeration is just bleeding out into the business and you're actually wasting money that you can't physically see, but you'll see it when it shows up in your utility bill. So simple measures, you don't have to really go that far. And if you want more complex measures, you have evaporator fan controls, condenser retrofits, you have all types of operation and maintenance or new upgrades within the energy efficiency space that will help you save energy on your electric bill, and then you could give back to your business and to the community, right? Occasionally, you should also look to recalibrate your thermostats, check on your appliances. This technology is not perfect, right? If you don't know how to do that, there's tons of professionals to help you along that path so that you are setting and operating at the correct temperature for optimal performance. Another common mistake that I viewed within this space is that the SMB, particularly community, don't think that their contributions will necessarily move the needle, so as a reduction in their carbon footprint. And as so, they would rather do nothing. They'd rather spend their money elsewhere, right? But they're not. That's not correct, as we all know. And there are a lot of organizations that are out here and utility programs like the one I run to help them adopt these measures, right? So you also have incentive and rebate programs run by state and city municipalities. As a response to COVID, the United States Small Business Administration launched the Restaurant Revitalization Fund to provide emergency assistance for eligible restaurants, bars, and other qualifying food sector businesses impacted by COVID. The benchmark study also cites stakeholder engagement as largely overlooked tool to drive some of this economic change and development, which is critical for success, right? There's so much information out there, and for a small business owner that doesn't necessarily have time on the end user side, how are they going to find it, right? So collaboration and stakeholder engagement, I think, is a necessary tool for us to collectively work together. I've been working with Energy Star, Small Business Services, the Chambers of Commerce, National Restaurant Association, United Bodegas of America to really put together the material to help this industry take the next step. Now, when you think about the production side, but
just a quick question. I'm thinking, you're talking about all those benefits. There are also something called incentives, right?
Yeah.
Is there something that to help business owners? What can they do in order to apply for those incentives? What kind of incentives are they?
Yeah, so Eric, that's a good question. I was kind of rattling based off of the question, just setting the context for the issue. But the incentives that we have are dollars, right? Basically, incentives, like, as I mentioned before, HVAC upgrades, refrigeration, lighting controls, building electrification. I heard a gentleman on the last panel speak about our clean heat program, which we're launching for electrification of the heating system in the winter. So the program I manage is roughly between $40 and $50 million annually to get a reduction on electric and on the gas side. And what we do is we've launched a turnkey program for this market segment where it starts with a free no obligation energy assessment, where you have a contractor walk into a business, identify areas to upgrade the baseline existing conditions by means of energy efficient technology. And if the customer decides to move forward with some, all or none, it's at no cost to them initially for the assessment. Now, once they decide that they want to move forward, we subsidize, at least in this program, up to 70% of the total project cost. The customer is responsible for that delta, that 30%. We also have financing available so that if the customer doesn't have the upfront capital, we're able to help them move along with some of these projects. So to date, we've engaged about 90,000 customers with 40,000 participating, right? And with a market size of 350,000 eligible customers within this market segment.
If they want to apply for those incentives, Sean, did they go to the Con Edison website, or how does that work?
Yeah.
I mean,
the
website.
It's a multi-pronged approach, Eric. So we do have a website, it's kana.com/small business. We also have incentive programs for the large commercial sector, the multifamily market segment, and the residential. So there are incentives for each market segment out there, right? That's kana.com/energy efficiency, if you wanted to check that out. And we do a lot of marketing campaigns, email blasts. We equip our contractors with collateral so that they could make the public aware and these business owners aware of the opportunities that are out there for them. And, you know, it's not only us. I mean, we have targets. We work closely with NYSERDA, that was mentioned on the previous panel, as well as the New York State Energy Research Development Authority, to really set our goals and our targets at the state level with the New York State Public Service Commission. Then we go out and set to hit those targets with all. It's a multi-pronged approach, Eric. But yeah, you can find information pretty much anywhere.
I understand. Yeah, we had in the pre-discussion, I mean, you did almost mission impossible. You know, you talked about a very large topic, climate change, and tried to make that specific for the food sector. And it looks like it's all small, but if you add it all up, it's big. So I want to thank you for, you know, the introduction, the wonderful presentation. And I think also your comment about this is about business. You know, efficiency is a business topic, and you have to address that in your business strategy. So thank you, Sean. And now I want to go to the next panelist, RJ Bianculi. RJ, I saw that your name was Devin in the beginning, but I think you changed it now to RJ, which is excellent. RJ is the managing director of Emerald Brand, a company known for its innovative tree-free packaging products. You know, it nicely ties to the discussion we had before. His company has been a leading innovator in sustainable everyday disposables made from renewable material to combat deforestation and the global plastic crisis, especially the global plastic crisis. Mike mentioned to me that, you know, I'm originally from the Netherlands. If I go back to the Netherlands, I can tell you, I can't get plastic bags anymore. When I go to my supermarket here in New Jersey, there's plenty of them available. So I'm very glad that, you know, your company is there. And also I saw recently your company and the Honest Company announced a new sustainable packaging initiative for beauty products. And I just want to say packaging is now widely seen as the next step in a sustainability journey and continuous improvement. So question I have for you, Rolf, and then the floor is yours, is what can you tell our audience, what you see as the most important packaging waste trends for the food sector? It's yours.
Thank you, Eric, and good morning, everyone. You know, I've been in this industry 15 years, my entire career, and I'll keep it very brief, and I'll answer your question. When my family started this company, my father started this company in 1997. Nobody knew what green was. I mean, people literally laughed at him. And he was an executive in the paper and plastics industry for many years, ironically. And he saw this movement coming. There are a couple of things personally that had gone on within our family that had sort of motivated my father to get involved in the space. But what we've done over the years, starting over almost 25 years ago, is essentially disrupted and transformed the paper and plastic industry, which has never been, in the hundreds of years they've been around, disrupted or transformed. I would argue that and maybe I'm biased, is probably one of the hardest industries to transform. You've got major multi-billion-dollar conglomerates that have controlled and run this space for many, many years, and have infrastructure in the world that has really not changed for many, many years. So I would say it's probably one of the hardest industries to disrupt. And I have some show and tell to show everybody today and some of the things that we've created and we've done. But ultimately, our goal was to eliminate trees and eliminate plastic in disposables. And people say, well, how the heck do you do that? Is it recycled? We personally, our company believes, and I personally believe, and I look at the facts and some of the raw data out there on recycling. I don't know if everybody knows this, but only 9% of plastics that are actually put in the recycling bin, not plastics that are produced, but that are actually put in a recycling bin, get recycled or see a second life. So that means 91% of plastics that go into recycling bins are either incinerated, or they're ending up in the ocean, or they're ending up in landfills. And I think we all know the challenges that occur with that. So what we believe is the ultimate future goal, and where we see everything going, is to make everything from completely organic or compostable materials. So we make everything from tree-free toilet paper to compostable 100% tree-free folding cartons. This is Jessica Alba's brand, and this is a really cool brand that we partnered with as well, Dr. Squatch, which is a major soap brand, where we're now making all of these products, facial tissue, from and this is interesting in the food discussion, from the waste product of agricultural crops. So that's a fancy way of saying when sugar is grown, when corn is grown, when wheat is grown. Not a lot of people know this, but the majority of the weight of those crops is not the crop itself. It's the byproduct or the fibrous stalk that's associated with it. And hundreds and hundreds of millions of tons a year, just in this country alone, are thrown away or burned of that byproduct. We buy it from farmers. So they're traditionally wasting it. They're throwing it away. They're burning it. They're backfilling lakes and rivers with this material. And we buy it from them. So we're giving them an added source of revenue, which we all know farmers need. And they don't have to throw this material away, but instead we pulp it and turn it into the different products that we produce, paper towels, cartons, and whatnot. And it completely eliminates the need for trees to be used. It completely even eliminates the need for recycled fiber, which originates from trees, to be used. And also our bioplastic technology, which I'm drinking a cup of coffee out of our cup, which may look like plastic or recycled plastic, but it's actually 100% plant-based, and it's 100% compostable. So we believe that this whole movement is ultimately, and it's going to be by necessity, is going to go into fully what we call a full circle solution, fully compostable products. So all your organic food waste and all your disposables, ultimately, we'd love to see be thrown into one bin, hauled off to a commercial composting facility, and reintegrated into organic soil that, again, just continues that cycle. So hopefully that gives everybody a little bit of an idea of what we've done. I just crunched about 22 years of investment in R&D and bringing all of this material and products to market into about 5 minutes. But to answer your question, Eric, I believe that the biggest challenge in this space is education. And we can talk all we want about politicians and the Paris Accord. At the end of the day, this movement has to be driven by grassroots. It has to be. And the way it's going to be driven by grassroots is through education. And so we don't look at ourselves as a technology or a product company. We look at our mission that it is to educate young generations and future decision makers of this country and this world, so they ultimately will make this change. And all we have to do is bring the technology to market that makes it affordable, that makes it quality effective, and that makes it scalable, makes it abundant. That's a big.
And education is also changing behaviors. You know, that's how I see how education is reflected in the market. There's a question here, RJ, that I'm going to read for you, and hopefully you can respond to that. There are two questions. One of the questions is, how are the compostable packaging products composted? are they only able to break down in commercial composting facilities, or could they break down in a backyard composter?
Sure.
And it says here as a follow-up, if it's only a commercial facility, how do you communicate to the consumer so they know how to handle? You know, all very practical questions here.
It's a fabulous question, and the short answer to that is it depends on the product. In a backyard type of facility, you know, at the end of the day, you'll have your towel and tissue, your molded fiber, your paper towels will break down, but bioplastics will have a tougher time breaking down in a traditional backyard facility. They will eventually over time, but it may take significantly longer than in a commercial composting facility. And one of the biggest challenges this movement has is end of life, meaning the infrastructure, at least at this country, that our infrastructure capabilities as it relates to commercial composting facilities, they're popping up. They're becoming a little bit more abundant. I'd be careful to use the word abundant, but we are seeing more and more. And part of this movement ultimately, and it's the chicken or the egg. It's like, do you invest in commercial composting facilities, or do you invest in making sure that the majority of the market is using fully compostable goods first? It's like this balancing act that they're going through right now that's really, really interesting. But certainly we're seeing both happening. We're seeing an increase in availability of commercial composting facilities, and we're seeing increased consumption in commercially compostable disposables. But it's going to take time. It's going to take education. It's going to take change of behavior, like you said, Eric, which ultimately takes generations to do.
Yeah. Well, thank you, RJ. And you know, I'm so glad that we have people like you and companies like your family business in order to tackle this problem. You know, I only have to think about COVID and the takeout meals. It's and the you know, the waste that all generated about the plastic utensils, etc., and more plastic. And we already have. So you know, that's only one thing, but it looks like there are solutions. You know, there are innovations on its way in order to reduce that. And maybe, you know, one day we will get to a zero waste kind of community. That would be great. Thank you, Rolf. And let's go to our next panelist, Tony. Tony Abati is he's a VP, Vice President, and Chief Technology Officer at Atmos Air Solutions. And Atmos Air is known for its solutions for healthier indoor air. And we had just a huge discussion about that a couple of not in the during the first panel. So I understand, Tony, your company provides innovative purification technologies that help to create tangible benefits to human health and productivity. And I see many similarities between the need for clean water, you know, which was something that was nice to have a couple of years ago. Now it's absolutely essential. And the need for clean air quality, because that was also something that we took for granted, but not anymore. And especially during COVID, you know, the indoor quality. So this topic couldn't be more urgent than what we're discussing now in this panel. So can you tell us, Tony, what do you think are the most important clean air quality trends impacting the food sector? And maybe it's good to start with, you know, what your company is doing. And I also understand some of your clients are in the food sector, correct?
Yes, and thank you, Eric, for that introduction. And some of the points you made are just dead on in what the challenges are being faced today in the marketplace. My company offers both air purification solutions and also air monitoring solutions. And I'm starting to see air monitoring and air quality awareness becoming hugely important to most people. Everybody on this event right now is breathing, but I would chance to guess few people know exactly what they're breathing. And so that's become very important with, of course, the pandemic accelerating this heightened awareness that understanding what you're breathing and how it might impact your health, and also the sustainability of the space around you. That's important as well. Everybody, I would chance to guess, that owns a restaurant or a grocery store or any type of commercial facility has an alarm system that monitors burglar and fire conditions, give you a warning when something is not correct. I think air quality monitoring is going to take that leap in the next few years, where everybody's going to want to know what's the status of the air they're breathing, and if something is not correct, it needs to be changed. Air quality solutions have also become very important as well. The pandemic, I think, affected every facet of the food handling industry, processing plants, packaging plants, grocery stores, restaurants, hugely affected by an airborne contaminant. And what I think and what we're seeing is that people are coming for solutions where they want to improve their air. And there's many facets in order to do that. The EPA pointed out 3, saying you need to consider source control. And I think with the pandemic, all we've done is consider source control, keep people out and mask them and keep them distant. We're trying to keep the source out. Ventilation. Now, ventilation is critically important. The air that's being delivered has to be delivered correctly. But the problem is sometimes upgrading ventilation can be very costly. And that may come into play where a person like Sean and Con Edison can have programs that can help places get the ventilation upgrades they need. And then lastly is air cleaning. And air cleaning is another, I think, push-pull situation where there's lots of ways to clean air, but many cause you to use more energy and become less sustainable. So how can you clean the air effectively, but maintain sustainability, maintain energy efficiency? That's where some innovative technologies, such as the one I'm very familiar with, which is bipolar ionization, come into play. Systems like bipolar ion systems are active. They go into a space and they react with contaminants at their source of emission and offer particle control, TVOC reduction, but importantly, an activation of microorganisms, but they do so without disrupting the mechanical system. So these are upgrades that buildings can put into place without drastic mechanical re-engineering that can, again, breed the healthy air benefits that we need without spending the energy. And where, again, programs like Con Edison has, and we've worked with other utilities in the past as well, can have incentive programs that can help pay for these measures. And again, giving the people that maintain facilities a message that they can give to people that are entering that facility that we've made measures to provide you with as safe an experience as possible. And that's become a very important message. And I think everybody is looking for that message when they enter a space, is what measures have you taken to ensure that I have a safe and healthy environment? And of course, the air is going to touch every person, every surface constantly. So it's the one factor I think buildings need to consider. And as you said very well, Eric, it's not become a nice to have anymore. It's become a need to have.
Right.
We can't just take it for granted.
Yeah, and I don't know if you know this, Tony. I mean, I'm just I love restaurants, and not because I need to eat, but it's more for social networking. That's why I go out to restaurants. So a restaurant is much more to me than just food. It's everything else. You see those ABC ratings, especially in New York City. For that A rating, do you know if that's connected to the clean air quality? And if that's not the case, do you think that it should be part of that A rating?
What's interesting, at current it isn't. However, there is talk in New York City about linking air quality and environmental quality to a rating unto itself. So they are working on a rating system. I'm not sure when the implementation is going to happen, but that is something that's been actively discussed through legislation.
Yeah.
That there will be a rating to the environmental health, the cleanliness of the air of the space you're entering. So exactly the point, how can you feel good about not just what might be served on your plate, but what's being served all around you?
No, and that's I was also thinking about, I fly a lot, unfortunately. That's bad for my carbon footprint. But I understand there's a lot of engineering into clean air, ventilation and things like that. Is that the kind of of technology that you apply for indoor facilities, for example, at restaurants, or is that something completely different?
Well, the beauty of the technology, the bipolar ion technology, is it really works with the engineering you have in place. So basically, you have a system that's intended to deliver conditioned air and to keep the space comfortable. An ion system inserts, in our case, it's a bipolar ion tube, which is really the most prevalent and most time-honored form of bipolar ionization, into that supply air to enrich that air with bipolar ions. Now, ions are something that people breathe in every day. They're part of the natural ecosystem. And if you were in a much more clean, pristine environment, maybe in a mountain area or far from population, the ion level is greatly higher. As we get down into more populated areas and into indoor spaces, that natural ion supply has been depleted by man-made pollution and emissions. So the simple measure of an ion system is to restore the ion level in the indoor space as to what it would be in a clean outdoor space. But the beauty of it is that it works with the mechanical system. So it goes into the air and it enriches whatever air is coming across those ion tubes with these beneficial ions. It doesn't require the building owner, the operator, or whatever the case may be. It could be a car or a bus for that matter. Cruise ships, we've done all manner of these different environments.
Yeah.
It doesn't require the mechanical system to be re-engineered to it. However, the caveat is that a well-designed mechanical ventilation system is going to make any air cleaning strategy work better. So it's important that you have a good health check on your mechanical system.
Yeah, sometimes I wish I studied to become an engineer and not a chartered accountant, Tony, because I think that's much more fascinating than keeping financial statements together. I think clean air is more, it's a human right? That's the way I look into it. It's something that we all deserve. And sometimes we take it for granted, but we can't take it for granted anymore. You also said something about, regulation. I think that's a good message. This is something that you're planting the seed, I think, for many business owners, that they probably have to look into this and to make, especially with COVID and how important it is to get customers back indoor. I think that clean air is really important. The last question I have for you is clean air in relationship with productivity. Can you say a little bit about that? I mean, how important, to have productivity of your employees, for example, in spaces that have clean air versus not clean air? Is there some information available that you can see a direct connection between having clean air and higher productivity?
A lot of studies just to that point. Harvard did a very good study where they showed that in a cleaner, healthier environment, cognitive function is improved. People remember better, people react better. The property management company, Jones Lang LaSalle, did a very good study, and they called it the 330-300. And what it really showed was that investments into things that can improve the health and productivity of your employees pay far greater dividends than investing into building infrastructure and even energy upgrades for that matter. In any space, the most important asset are the people that you employ and what you can do to make them more productive, to make them healthier, less likely to call out sick or become absent, is less likely to be disturbed by the environment around them, will pay back in great financial and other dividends, much more so than many other things that you can do. There's a sure causal link between the two. And that's an important factor. This is a very human function. Is what you breathe, of course, is very personal to everyone. And what you can do to certainly address that, improve it, and also make sure that what you're doing is visible and transparent. And that's where I think the monitoring, the censoring comes in. There certainly is a level of comfort when you walk into a space and there's something that says, hey, the environment around you here is healthy. That even from a psychological aspect, already you feel better about being in that space.
Okay. Wonderful, Tony. And you also made very clear that there's a business case for this one as well. I'm
Yes,
also
sir.
glad to hear, because sometimes, and maybe it's because I'm aging, I forget certain things. So I thought maybe it's my age, but it may not be the age, it may be the air I'm breathing. So I will pay attention to that as well. So thank you very much for addressing this topic. This was, I don't know about the other participants, but there was a lot of new things in your presentation. So thank you for sharing that. Before I go to the last panelist, I just looked into the chat box, and I think this is more a question for Sean. Sean, there was a question, and it says, is the population the real fundamental issue for CO2 emissions? Is that something that you can address?
Well, it certainly doesn't help, but I wouldn't say that it's the main driver, though. You know, I think that there's something to be said about human behavioral characteristics, as has been brought up during this panel, right? And really using what we have efficiently and effectively, right? So if you have a large population, but they are shutting off the lights when they go out, or they're closing the refrigeration, or any other function that's tied to energy, then a city with less population that is more wasteful could have the same CO2 emissions, right? Because then you have to deliver more energy to them, which could entail fossil fuel usage, depending on the chemistry of how that delivery system is actually operated, right? So it does play a role, but again, I think if you look to certain countries, I think Norway is pretty sustainable, right? They have very clean landscape, and Sweden as well. When you look at certain parts of the world that are more environmentally conscious, then the population could be the same, but they're going to have a reduced carbon emissions. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's not. It depends.
Yeah. No, I think it does. I think I just saw it in the chat box. I just want to make sure that I address it. I think also, I think about this way. For every new person on planet Earth, we also need a new tree, right? And it looks like we are burning our trees and we are promoting the population on planet Earth. So there's an imbalance there. No, but thank you for your reflection. Okay, thank you, Tony and Sean. Last but not least, let me introduce you our last speaker, Michael. Michael Denuso is the Associate Director of Campus Services with the New York University. He is responsible for overseeing facilities-related projects, equipment management, and sustainable initiatives for his division. Michael has been recognized as a rising star for both the Society for Hospitality and Food Service Management, as well as Food Service Director magazine. He has big ambitions, but he has even a bigger appetite. And I found out that Michael and I share the same passion. Besides sustainability, we like to eat everything that's good. So Michael, welcome to be on board. For you, it's the same question. Because within the New York University, the campus, there are many restaurants. You serve meals to many, many people, younger people in particular who need healthy meals. So what can you tell us or the audience, what you see as the most important kitchen approach trends? We talked a little bit about this in our last panelist. And maybe you can also, see how, or maybe also how these food products are being marketed. We talked about education. It was also mentioned in the first panel. It was mentioned again by RJ. So if you can look into some of those trends that are relevant for the food sector, that would be great. And the floor is all yours.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Going to be open and honest and say that RJ stole my thunder here. I think he hit the nail on the head, right? It's education. So being in higher ed, right? I'm a firm believer that education drives change, right? You need to understand where you're working from and have knowledge about it to actually create an impact. What I can only tell you is that you need to focus on something that we're seeing across the board, which is consumer demand has changed, right? Consumer behavior and demand has changed. But what hasn't changed is the fact that we all want an affordable, nutritious, and tasty meal, right? So that across the board has stayed the same.
Yep.
The thing is, the consumer demand has changed the vision of what that is. Now, as operators, providers of food, we need to make sure we highlight that, right? So when you talk about aspects of way to highlight more nutritious food or ways to implement it in a menu that's sustainable, I laugh at one of the comments I saw in the chat that like, there wasn't a vegetarian option on a menu before, right? And now what you see when you go to restaurants, and I hate to say it, but where it used to be on the back page, now it may be something that's forward facing on the front page, right? Where your specials were always the Kobe beef burger or the 64-ounce porterhouse, right? Maybe it's something with cauliflower now or cauliflower steak. And I think that really education is key here in the sense that like, we just want something that's tasty and we will order it again if it is tasty, right? So like, it's opening up that experience for a first time. And I think that's a key opportunity that a lot of people have to act on. Another thing with the food service thing, and I'll talk about it from a variety of approaches, and that's on the food side, right? So the menu side, menu placement, making sure that people understand what tasty is. And one thing that you said, Eric, that I loved, me and you being foodies, is that when you go to a restaurant, you're not just going for the food, you're going for the experience, right? Like the total package. That experience doesn't start at the table. It starts where the food was sourced, right? So whether it was locally sourced, comes in, there's a different characteristic from when someone explains that menu to you and they're like, yeah, this came from a farm down the block, as opposed to, yeah, it came in a box and sat somewhere in our loading dock and then we put it in and chopped it up and now it's on your plate, right? And I think when you can speak to something more and there's a locality and I guess an understanding of where that actually came from and what it took to get there, you appreciate it that much more, right? And then when you talk about the experience from an overall approach, like the layout of a space, the equipment in a space, right? Like being efficient, when Sean hit on that, like that applies to everything, right? When you're efficient in food production, you don't have waste. When you have less waste, you don't have to worry about larger composting things, larger waste things. And I feel like efficiency is a key thing here. Something that I personally think, being the equipment person, and day and night will laugh, you made a comment that they get calls from their customers all the time. I am one of those customers. The phone definitely rings on my behalf, right? But smart technology, and this applies to everything, in my personal opinion, is really going to start to pave the way for change. And the reason being is, I think, which, when I looked at that report that you sent out, Eric, I almost had like a quick little panic attack because it's quick to focus on the negatives, right?
Right.
But really, you have to pivot, and that word we use so much during COVID. So turn around and be like, wow, even though it's not what we want, it shows the areas for opportunity that we can make change. And I feel like change gets mitigated or doesn't happen when there's too many barriers in place. And I feel like smart technology, from thermostats to dish machines and all these like equipment that can actually store data, which you spoke about it, how it's such a critical piece to make change, simplifies the process of change, right? Like if I don't have to go and turn off the lights myself, but the system knows that I leave the house at 8 p.m. or I go to bed at 10 p.m., that makes my life easier, but the benefits of that change are still happening, right? So anything you can do to simplify the process from a sourcing, production, cooking, waste management is really going to be the reason why change actually happens in a multitude of spaces. And I also think, we're creatures of habit, right? Like, and it takes a lot to break a habit, but the reality is, what I also saw in these studies was that there really wasn't a plan in place. And I think in order to put a plan in place, you can't just speak to it, you also have to act to it. And what I've seen in a lot of areas and departments and organizations that are successful is that you dedicate someone to lead that charge, right? It's not just a conversation that happens at a table amongst people who know somewhat about the topic, but there is actually a subject matter expert that you can turn to that can advise and hold people accountable. Because when there's no accountability, there's no change. There's just continuous conversations about the same topic. And I think those are some key things, right? And like I said, it's wild to look at that report and see where we are. But I also think the reality of things is this younger generation, me being at higher ed and seeing it, they're pushing for change. And I think that we're in a unique time because where before, we were sending messages with carrier pigeons, like we have social media now. Like you can send out a message in 0.1 seconds. And when you look at how people are learning, I don't want to take away from the establishment that I'm at, being a student myself, but like people learn from a 1-minute TikTok video these days. As long as the message is impactful and correct, you can definitely change the way education happens and hit larger masses in a quicker time, which should result in a larger impact and change. So yeah, that's my approach on it, I think.
No, wonderful, Michael. And I think it's all true. I think you refer to that report, and we discussed this report because there's an urgency there. And it looks like it's business as usual, and that's not going to help us. And I think with the COVID event, we come to the realization that yes, that's just one event, but I can say with certainty that more of those events will be impacting us, not only the food sector industry, but all different kind of industries. My success was based on when I started to work for Royal Dutch Shell. Well, look where they are now. So this is massive, and so that urgency should be like planting the seed that you need to do something, that you need to understand those risks, and that this comes down to education. And once you go through that whole process, it will motivate you to change. I'm a forensic accountant as well. And sometimes what really changes people's behaviors is to go through a crisis. That's where we are in right now. So there's definitely room for improvement. The other thing that I want to emphasize is sustainability. What I said before, it's not a sideshow. It's strategic. If you want to sustain your business, you have to build in the things that Sean talked about, climate change, that RJ talked about disposables, waste. That's a big issue. Tony, about clean air, and Michael, you about it's the whole experience. It's not something like, it's not one single thing you have to manage. It's a wide variety of things. I do have, there's a question, and I think it relates to diversity. And I don't know, Michael, if that's something that you can address. If I look at this panel, I see fabulous people, but they're all men. There are no women. So the question is, are there any women in this field? I mean, is this something? What can you tell in terms of, this is just one aspect of diversity. Is there something there? Do you have some words of wisdom with respect to diversity?
Yeah, the first word of wisdom is when we pick the date for the second of these, it will not have as many scheduled conflict with the several women that we invited to be panelists and moderators. The unfortunate truth is scheduling any event, especially to get the level of expertise, which we've gotten from the first two groups, and we'll certainly get from the third. We want to make sure that the next time around, those that can participate can make it, and those that can educate will absolutely do so. The other thing, which this being the inaugural, that's important to know, our vision is to create community. I think each of the panelists has talked today about the importance of taking independent, decisive action. Grassroots makes the difference. And for us, this is the first of what we believe and intend will be an ongoing series to build that community. There are several members that may be just participants in the audience today that would love to serve on a panel or suggest topics for the future, and we want to hear from that. Just as each of the panels have discussed, it is about what we bring to it, what we do. And I believe in the first group, we heard from one analyst say, don't worry about the Paris Accords, just adopt them yourself. And the same kind of mentality applies to how we want to proceed with this ongoing, very important series. What a perfect way almost to segue into our third and final panel. This group, brilliant in every way, shape, or form. Eric set the perfect tableau because he's sitting in front of many books in his library. And of course, this panel ended with someone from New York University, one of the greatest institutions on the planet. And each one talked about in different ways the critical role education plays in creating more sustainable business practices. Each one talked about how behaviors can be changed, how things can move forward just by learning a little bit more on a day in and day out basis, and then daring to do things different, whether it's coming up with the unique, truly sustainable packages, turning waste into logical, useful, productive product, whether it is introducing new menu items, or whether it is treating the air we breathe at the source and the space, and monitoring it the same way we do virtually everything else. What we heard from this panel are practical ways, and then from a business perspective, leading organizations like Con Edison being able to provide some financial benefits, to your wonderful point, Derek, that this is the competitive advantage in doing business. It is not an additional cost, and it is, as you said, a methodology that will help you, regardless of who you compete against, beat those that are less efficient. So thank you so very much for this magnificent panel, for all of your brilliance, and for setting the stage for so much more to come. Again, great stuff. The last final panel is food waste realities and best practices. If today's program opened up with localizing global sustainability, there's no topic that can be as local to this audience as food waste. The dimensions of the problem carry beyond the most obvious, and interestingly enough, the first two panels made more than passing reference to food waste. Methane gas, CO2 being pumped into the ozone by massive trucks hauling tons of food waste represent enormous economic and environmental problems. This panel lives the experience, and unfortunately, this is a panel where there were several schedule conflicts, so we're going to hear from fewer than the others, but no less brilliant. These panelists, these experts offer insights for how all can stop the waste and turn waste into highly productive, useful, positive endeavors. Our moderator, Dr. Hiren Bavzar, Professor of Economics, State University of New York, heads the school's agribusiness program. His PhD is in applied economics. And so when you bring all those things together, it is a perfect complement to what we just heard. It is not just about doing well and doing good. It is also prospering and profiting as a result. Dr. Bavzar is the ideal person to lead this vital and our final panel of the day. So I turn it over to you, our good professor doctor from way up in the North Country.
Hey, good morning. Well, it's still good morning, I guess, in Eastern time. So everywhere else is good morning too. Thank you all for joining today. I'm going to just might be a little bit different approach from what you might have seen in the first two panels. I don't see, and Mike, correct me, do we have all the panelists already here? I was trying to figure out if.
Yes. Looks like, yes, Robert and Devin, the unfortunate numbers 3 and 4 had massive schedule conflicts going into today. So what we've got, we're missing 2 terrific people, but we've got the 2 geniuses at work.
All right, that's what I was like, I don't see Peter Smith here, and I was like, I was going to introduce him, and then he's not here. So so anyways. What I wanted to do first to start with, just introduce a little bit about myself. Thanks, Mike, for the lovely introduction. So food waste, basically, when we talk about food waste, I always think of food waste is, my lunch or dinner plate where I didn't finish, or my kids' plate that what they didn't finish, and that's food waste. But it's a lot bigger and broad topic than just that. And my interest, of course, in food waste goes way back. It's obviously part of sustainability, as we know. And I've done some research on or sustainable agriculture in the past. My presentation topic when I interviewed for State University of New York at Canton was sustainable agriculture. So that's how I've done research on organic food, genetically modified food, and how what stops people from adopting organic, what stops farmers, or what are some of the issues that farmers face or consider when they're adopting or not adopting organic. And the biggest reason they do adopt organic food that I found in my research is environmental factors. They care about environment. in general. So that's why they adopt organic. They don't care about the cost or the money, but they care about the environment is the biggest. Of course, there is money to be made if you really do it well in organic food. And so that's how I got into, I was always into, when this one came along, I said, definitely what I wanted to do is, since we have our two panelists, first I'd like to introduce them to you. And we might have a few more series of questions than maybe the other panels we've had, so we know we may have brief question answer sessions for each panelist, and we'll go from there. And audience, if you have any questions, please put them forward. I'll try and pick as many as I can, hopefully by the end of the hour. So let me just, why don't I actually let the panelists introduce themselves, and maybe they can, instead of whatever little I know about them, let them introduce themselves and connect the audience with the food waste topic, or how do you relate to this topic, or in terms of what you do. So we'll start with Devin.
Sure. So just a bit about my history. I'm probably the youngest one here on the panel, but being so close to my schooling, I can speak a lot to some of the things that had interested me back then. So whether that's from launching composting initiatives to performing coral research down in Little Cayman and understanding the use of our impact of single-use plastics and coral bleaching and how that's affecting our environment. So come 6 or so years later, as I progressed in my career and worked in some of the largest restaurants here in New York City, physically size-wise, we have been forced, in that experience to comply with much of the state and city regulations. So while I do not have really a core experience in implementing the programs, I did have a lot of experience maintaining them on an operational level within my restaurants, educating my staff on compliance and regulations, and then also working and brainstorming to drive new ideas on a restaurant by restaurant basis within the company. So now here at Day and Night, I work alongside my team and focus on special projects. Sustainability has always been a huge passion of mine, as well as food. Clearly, with my hospitality experience, I was back of house for about 10 years, I would say, childhood all the way up through college. And then after getting a business degree, I moved into management front of house there. So I've seen both sides. I've always been passionate not only about eating food, but sourcing it. And then as well, understanding the initiatives that can really work to divert that waste, even on a personal level, something that I've grown to be self-taught and learn more about myself.
Thank you. And Robert Gates from Orca. Good morning, Robert. If you can introduce yourself. I'm good, thank you.
Thanks for the welcome, and thanks for Mike for the intro. Devin, pretty cool hearing about your background. I didn't know all about that coral project you did down the Cayman Islands. I'm going to pick your brain about that offline.
Yeah, absolutely.
My name is Robert Gates. I'm the director of sales for Orca Digesters. And Orca is a company that specializes in food waste management and food waste diversion. Our technology, called the Orca Digester, it empowers businesses to divert food waste from the landfills without the need for bags, bins, garbage trucks, and the landfills themselves. Our technology also has a very powerful software component to it that provides data and analytics as it pertains to their waste stream and their waste volumes. And our clients can use that data to really drive waste reduction and limit the amount of waste they produce in the first place. We'll talk a little bit about that later. We operate in about 15 different countries. We've helped thousands of different clients across the globe sustainably manage their food waste. myself, I've worked with different clients during my time in Hong Kong with Orca, in Los Angeles, and now I'm calling from Toronto. So a little bit of experience globally in working with those clients around the world, understanding how they typically were managing food waste, prior to our technology, some of the challenges they faced, and the solutions that we're able to provide. So I'll be able to dive a little bit deeper into some of that as the topic progresses. So thanks for the intro.
Thank you. Okay, so what I wanted to do, let's introduce the audience a little bit in the broad aspect of what food waste, or what are some of the realities of food waste are. And Devin, let's start with you. How do you see, based from where you are, what you do, what do you see like what is food waste, and what do you see out there in your industry that constitutes food waste?
So I think there's two general fields of thought on that definition, and some people allocate food waste just to being the physical food that is wasted, after production and transportation of that to an end user, and then what happens to that food after it's either purchased or taken in by a restaurant group or even a household. So there's that, but then my belief is really more food waste encompasses all and everything that goes into the production, transportation, delivery, processing, and then again hitting your end user. So it opens you up to a much wider breadth of ways you can impact that supply chain line, and ways that people might not even be aware of where food waste lies. So whether that's in farming efforts and having to dispose of millions of pounds of material every single year within the fields, or if you're an end user in a restaurant that now has product that you're disposing of and not doing it in a sustainable fashion, or if you meet in the middle with packaging and freight shipping across the United States and how you're choosing to ship that food, which often is very heavy, leading to high freight impact when it comes to the environment. Then there's multiple ways there that you could view, I think, this topic in general, and there's different facets of it that maybe not having one solution for all of them, but multiple solutions for each sector in that realm, I think, is very important.
Thank you, Robert. What do you see? In terms of what you do? What is food waste, and how does that play a role in what you do?
Yeah, and I just want to jump on to kind of what Devin was talking about there, and I think he hit the nail on the head that so many people think of food waste as the unavoidable food waste. The waste that comes from prepping our meals. The bones from our ribs and our chicken wings that we ate. Some of that stuff that we think may not be avoidable at all. But I think the bigger problem of food waste, as Devin mentioned, is the avoidable food waste, the food that's lost in logistics, in the supply chain, in weather crisis, in agriculture and things. And I think that represents a huge lion's share of food waste. In fact, I think it's like 30% or higher of food that was destined for sale or consumption never actually makes it there and becomes waste before it ever gets into a store or onto someone's plate. And I think that the biggest challenge there, the biggest concern of mine is that we even have this food waste, this avoidable food waste to begin with, especially when we have such a global food security problem. And there's many people, there's many countries that don't have the same access to food as other countries do. And developed nations, our inefficiency in managing and moving food and getting it onto our plates is causing, a lack of food and a food shortage in other areas of the world. So I think that's the biggest problem, is that food waste exists and there's hungry people out there. And it's just, distribution and allocation of that food that already exists and its inefficiency it's causing the biggest crisis.
Yes, and one of the things I always used to, every time I tell my kid, there are people there, if they're not eating, and I tell them, hey, there's kids in Africa who would be very happy to have this meal. They're like, I pack it and ship it to them, so I don't have to eat it. But anyways, so yes, the undernutrition and overnutrition, there's obviously an issue that we face. There are parts of the world that are overeating eating, and then there's parts of the world they're under eating. But now you mentioned something about ribs and bones, and is there an issue specifically, I would say, between, let's say, something like meat products versus when we're talking about, somebody mentioned farmers when they and earlier in the previous panel, that was a very, I think I forgot the name, but those products that he showed, I think those were great. And I was like using the farm waste products that we don't even think about. So is it one of the two, like, would you put, if you wanted to point a finger at something that is more pressing as an issue right now, like the food we eat, the meats and stuff, or is it the farm products or plant-based product waste that is an issue?
Tough question to answer. So I'm going to be speculating slightly. I eat meat. Let me add that disclaimer first. I'm not a vegetarian, I'm not a vegan.
Well, I don't, but that's okay.
So, I think the topic of meat production, raising cattle, the amount of methane gas that's produced, the amount of fresh water resources that needs to be used to produce those, that meat products, even the agricultural products like the farming, the wheat, the corns, all of that. We are using resources, and there is an emissions component to producing that food. And that's why it's even more important to sustainably or responsibly manage the food waste that we create, post-consumer, even pre-consumer, grocery stores, people that are, prepping, doing some sort of catering, actually doing food production. It's almost more important now than ever to focus on doing the right thing with that food waste that we have all created, our businesses have created, because of the impact and the environmental impact that we're now all starting to recognize the actual production of that food in the first place. So we don't want to double end this and have, environmental impact on both sides. There needs to be a way to manage that on the production side and the post-consumer side and the disposal side as well. Devin, anything to add to that?
Yeah, just to hop on. I mean, I think there's a double-ended sword, sort of like you said there. In production, obviously, the amount of water and the amount of often fuel that it takes to be running farms is pretty substantial, and a subsidized business that is already pushing some people into poverty. I think that's where the social issues start to join in on top of climate. And then having the fact that I think the number is, like you mentioned, there's 20% in production and pre-delivery of wasted foods, whether it be because of blemishes or rotting or insects, which that one could be disposed of in a certain way. Obviously packaging along the way, and then freight, as I mentioned, using fossil fuels to transport all of that. And then once we get to the tail end, when it's actually in supermarkets or in hotels and in restaurant groups and in these skyscrapers of New York that have giant catering kitchens, there's another, I believe, 30 to 40% of wasted food once it hits the shelf. And so I think the real opportunity there to, one, affect the climate, but then also circle back around and understand that 1 in 8 kids in the United States is hungry. So there's two issues there. How are we wasting so much food, in producing this massive amount of food that is impacting the environment on the front end, and then impacting our environment on the back end with its lack of disposal, all while not feeding a society that clearly has an issue in itself, just with feeding hungry children, hungry families. So I think, the solution here is not necessarily coming up with one answer to tackle all those problems, like I said, but maybe pinpoint the fact that we, New York now with the redistribution of packaged and food to end users such as, and anyone in need, I guess. I'm not going to just single out anyone, or it could be somebody that's operating in tech. There's a bunch of new applications out there now that are actually linking local businesses with people like me who want to maybe go and get a pastry that's going to be thrown out the day before just because it has to, by store standards, because they don't want to be showing it on the window, and that goes straight into the garbage. You know, you might have heard or seen people, some called them freegans back in the day when the sustainability movement first got started, but people going to the back of grocery stores and pulling out massive amounts of perfectly fine food from their dumpsters, and which is illegal at the time. You know, nobody should be doing it now because they are setting up these systems. And I think that's what we need to elaborate on more, is recirculating that and understanding that trash and garbage is not the end answer. It's not where the food needs to end, and there's multiple other areas and other ways that it can be dealt with to, one, help the community and the society, one, help our world in terms of environmental sustainability in general, and then two, as we're seeing, at least on new developments and new products, and this will parlay into you, but cost savings down the line for commercial food producers and how they're disposing of their waste. So it seems like a really large project at hand to complete, but at the same time, in my opinion, it's all mutually beneficial to one another. So at some point, I think through education, like RJ had said in the previous segment, people are going to start to understand that we can fairly easily tie these things together and come up with concrete, solutions for any business, scale it up or down, for them to be able to, impact the environment, but also society in a positive way when it comes to, getting rid of the food that they may not want to be presenting.
Awesome. Actually, you mentioned something about food that's thrown away by stores. I'm one of those people, and I don't know whether good or bad. I buy those things, everything that is on sale, because they expire, whatever their sell by date or their expiry date or whatever is tomorrow, and they put it on sale. They call it manager special or whatever. I don't need to buy those donuts or croissants or whatever. I do that. I still buy them and I eat them. I know otherwise it's going to go to waste. And I make a change. I'm going to have a different snack tomorrow, or different breakfast tomorrow, or whatever. Or my kids, obviously, I have kids, so they can always eat whatever. If it's a bakery item, I'm pretty sure they can always eat them. So I always try make a habit. If I'm in the grocery store and I still see those things that I know it's gonna, if they don't sell it today, it's gonna get thrown away, I try and buy one of those or two of those if possible, because we do eat those things. It's not like I don't eat. If I don't eat it, of course I won't buy it. But I do eat donuts. I do eat whatever bakery products or cookies or whatever they're selling for cheaper today. In fact, I eat cookies now, they're cheap. That's even better. I'm an economist, right? So of course I'll take them. But of course, and I don't tell my wife that I bought them cheap. So when I go home, I remove that date sticker. I'm kidding, no. But anyways, so actually there is a question from the audience, and this actually does delve into the next question or next round of discussion, what I was going for. So one, it says, Robert, you started to describe your product. What does Orca do? And actually, I think that will basically fit into what I was going to ask next is, how do you see food waste contributing to the environment? Like things like we've mentioned earlier, methane gas, CO2, other things have been mentioned before. How do they contribute to that? And of course, what is now, that goes back to Robert, what some of the products or things you do, you mentioned digesters. So obviously, how do those help, or what do those do? And what can we maybe do in the future to improve the use of it or something?
And appreciate the opportunity, obviously, to talk about our technology a little bit. So Orca is an aerobic digester. And essentially, it's an on-site solution that we install right in clients' kitchens, in their building, in their facility, on their loading dock, wherever they have the space, that empowers them to be able to divert their food waste on-site without the need for the garbage infrastructure, the bags, the bins, the trucks, the drivers, the landfills. And essentially, it's an aerobic digester. So our technology is using microorganisms. We've created the perfect environment inside of our reactor tank in our unit, for those microorganisms to live, to breathe, to colonize, and to ultimately consume the food waste that we're feeding to the Orca unit. So An aerobic digester can typically be fed continuously throughout the day. It's not cycle-based like a dishwasher or washing machine would be. So as soon as the client has food waste in their hand, whether that's an apple or a banana peel that they've just had for breakfast, or whether it's up to 100 pounds, in a single feeding, they simply would approach the technology, our Orca, lift the lid and throw that food waste in and close the door. And the rest is handled by the technology itself. It's all automated. It's a one-touch solution for our clients. So what's actually happening inside of that reactor tank? That food waste is being introduced to that microorganism blend. They're hungry, they're living, they're breathing, they're ready to work. So they start eating and consuming that food waste that's being fed to the unit. Their waste product, their excrement, is essentially a liquid. It's a liquid effluent. About 70–75% of that effluent is really just moisture content. It's water that we've liberated from that food waste. About 20–25% of it is carbs, fats, and proteins. A lot of energy potential in that. About 5% of it is minerals. But all of that leaves our digester as a liquid. So it goes down the client's drain the same way that the rest of their wastewater streams would. So that could be their dishwasher, their sinks, the toilets, for example. All of that is commingling with the Orca effluent and leaving that facility's plumbing infrastructure through their sewer, their sanitary sewer. Now that joins to the city's sewer system, goes through the existing plumbing infrastructure in New York City, for example, and goes off to a wastewater treatment plant or a sewage treatment plant, where in many cases, especially in big cities and urban areas, they're using an anaerobic digester or a tertiary treatment to process, the nutrients and the energy potential inside of their wastewater stream and convert it to a renewable resource or a natural resource such as, a gas, or many times they'll use it to make electricity on site. So we're taking food waste from a business, digesting it on site, using the existing plumbing infrastructure to convey it to an anaerobic digester at the wastewater treatment plant, where they often repurpose those nutrients. So the major benefit, obviously, of using an Orca or an on-site digester is, offsetting the need for garbage trucks. Transportation of food waste, of waste in general, of anything, is burning a fuel source. That could be gasoline, that could be diesel, that could be even compressed natural gas. All of those fuel sources have an emissions component. They're, producing carbon dioxide, releasing that into our atmosphere, affecting our climate, affecting our overall environment where we live. Now, these garbage trucks, they're often driving hundreds of miles. They're driving to our businesses empty, picking up waste, driving it off to, in many cases, still a landfill. So just a big hole in the ground, we're throwing all our waste into it, and when they get full, we cover them up. Now, the problem with that is the way that food waste breaks down naturally in a landfill, it produces a ton of methane gas. So it really releases this emissions, this methane into our atmosphere. And methane, in terms of global warming or ability to hold temperature, is actually 86 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So we all think of carbon dioxide being one of the bad gases, the emissions in our atmosphere, in our environment, but really methane is having almost more of an impact than that carbon. So when this food waste breaks down naturally in a landfill, it releases that methane, goes up in the atmosphere, and can lead to climate change and global warming. So with Orca, and for businesses that are installing Orca, they offset the need for those trucks. They're diverting that food waste from the landfill. So they're having a positive environmental impact as it pertains to the disposal of food waste. Now, what's really cool with Orca now, and with a lot of on-site technologies, is they're becoming smart. So we're integrating IoT and M2M, and we're actually gathering all the data. We're recording that diversion effort. So every time someone feeds the Orca, it knows what date it was, what time it was, and how much food waste was actually fed to the system. All of that is published into our online dashboard, into our cloud portal. Client can log in, filter those results, take a look at their overall diversion, and they can run reports. But the cool thing is that it also converts those into environmental metrics, sustainability metrics, and allows a client to print out or to produce an infographic style report. The most important thing about data, we talk about waste reduction, not producing waste in the first place. In order to do that, you need to know how much waste you're producing, what kind of waste you're producing. So the data and the software component that's built into our Orca is tracking that. And it's allowing these clients to start to analyze the data and notice trends. So I'll give you an example. If a grocery store chain was using a digester or an Orca with this reporting feature. On a store level, they might be able to break down their waste stream by department now. They might notice that the produce department throws out way more on a Tuesday than any other day of the week. What are we doing differently on a Monday afternoon or on a Tuesday morning? Why are we producing so much waste on a Tuesday? Let's dive into that. Let's figure it out. And that allows them the tools to possibly, stop the overproduction, stop the over purchasing, and prevent that from being waste in the first place. The other thing is that same grocery store, if they were looking at this, on a chain level, they had Orca digesters in each one of their stores, they can now start to look at, trends store over store and compare these stores to each other. So they might have a store that has the same footprint, is targeting the same demographics, everything's the same, but it produces, 5 more tons of food waste every month in the other store. So it's going to allow them on a portfolio basis to actually analyze store by store where we're most efficient, where we're producing most waste, where's our biggest opportunity to cut back that waste, and also potentially save some money as well, because waste is money, right? If it's products that came off the shelves in that grocery store and it's going in the garbage, that's money essentially being tossed in the trash. So data, provides that knowledge and the ability to become more efficient. So I think in a very kind of quick nutshell, that's the Orca technology. That's how we can help, and that's the impact that we're typically having. Just to quickly summarize it one more time, an on-site solution typically provides 4 major benefits. So that's environmental, trucks off the road, reduction in food waste out of the landfill, financial. Traditionally, sustainability initiatives, technologies were more expensive than the status quo. But we're seeing with innovation, with componentry becoming cheaper, technology like Orca and other technologies that are disruptive to traditional industries are actually becoming more affordable, and in many cases are cheaper than the traditional way of doing things. So financial benefits would be, second. Third would be operational benefits, the ability to get more data on your operations, streamline the trash process, less pests, less odors, less garbage bags, better labor efficiency, less injuries. And then the fourth major category of benefits from an on-site solution can be regulatory compliance. So there's lots of different laws and food waste diversion bylaws popping up state by state that require landfill diversion, and a technology like Orca, supported by its software and its reporting, can help comply with these laws and regulations. So thanks for that, Heron, that question.
Thank you. So Devin, you want to jump in a little bit about, especially on the side of what are some of the environmental issues that the food waste is causing with methane gas, CO2, et cetera?
Sure. I mean, in general, as we know, the effect on the ozone is pretty massive when it comes to, waste and how we're disposing of it. So when food does go into those landfills, it's producing methane. And to my disbelief, we're still not making an attempt to capture it and turn it into clean energy of some sort. In my time, I studied abroad in Copenhagen many, many years ago, but walking through one of their power plants and seeing the new one they just launched with actually a ski hill on top, is proof in the pudding that you can definitely take these, trash areas and turn them into something engaging and sustainable and also educational for everyone. On the post end, I think the impact, especially in this city, is general cleanliness. As I'm in New York, food waste, I think would have a great impact, honestly, on the city when you think about the amount of germs that are spread and diseases by rats, as many of us know. We have a pretty incessant problem here. But why is that? That's because all of our food waste is thrown out on the sidewalk. Nobody's really separating the recycling. Nobody's really, making an effort or even aware of that. We have compost programs now in New York City that you can sign up for. So I think we're taking steps gradually, but there's environmental factors, that face each and every one of us on a daily basis just because of the amount of garbage that lays around in New York City. And I'm sure that can, be said for a lot of cities in New York. This is sort of the extreme. But as we then, choose of actually disposing of it again, increases in methane, and then also really coming up with a secure way to circle that food back down in a more recycled use, I guess you could say, rather direct to consumer. Again, we have programs in New York where food banks are accepting open arms. There's a metric, I think, that if we as a city were to improve our food, commercial food waste diversion programs, then by 5% in 1 year, food shelters in the area would receive up to 25% more in available food sources for their work and their needs. So I think on the environmental level, it's pretty overarching. It'd be hard to say what it's not impacting. Whether that be the ozone or whether that be, I went to school in Miami, so I'm very aware of the impact of cane sugar and its effect on mangrove systems of the east side of northern Miami, and now I'm moving down to the Keys and its effect on the Caribbean, and that's affecting some of the things that I was speaking about before, like coral bleaching, and that effect again circles right back into ozone gases and their ability to be transferred out of the air and into the ocean water. So everything is tied together. And so each of these things are going to have to be combated at their level if we're going to see change here. And I think, the amount of food waste that we have that is quantifiable is so clear that it is a great place to start in terms of actually making changes to our business practices that result in safer and cleaner and more socially responsible diversion programs.
I actually have a question for the moderator, if I may.
Yes, sir.
And both of your panelists, as well as others on previous segments, talked an awful lot about the positive economic impact of more sustainable business practices. To your knowledge, what economic models exist to help prove out the overwhelming case for better food waste protection and management? And if they don't exist, what might be some of your recommendations to help businesses that want to do some of the things that Robert and Devin talked about, but really don't know where to get started, need to prove it out in hard, fast dollars?
Okay. I actually had a question for Robert that kind of relates to that.
Yes.
But because Robert, you mentioned the food digesters being financially very sound. So I was going to ask, how much does it actually cost to put up an on-site digester, and how does it save money? Because to actually answer, Mike, your question, the basic cost benefit analysis studies that can easily prove what are the benefits of putting a digester versus traditional whatever method you've been using. And we can do that. What are the benefits and costs? And the cost benefit ratio studies exist. They've been done for hundreds of years on all kinds of these kind of projects or whatever initiatives you can talk about. So, but it all starts with what does it cost and how do those benefits outweigh that cost? So Robert, how does it, when it comes to cost, how much does it cost for, let's say, a grocery store? For it may not be as much, but for a small business, is it?
Take a step back, just to be a little unbiased. Obviously, I represent Orca and on-site.
Well, you can mention if there's, your competition and they're probably pricing ranges or something. That would work.
No, for sure. And that's not why I prefaced it that way. But I think, in terms of cost of managing food waste, it's definitely got a lot more affordable. In fact, when compared to truck and landfill style waste management, hauling totes off to a landfill, in big cities, definitely in cities that have implemented food waste policy already, using an alternative technology or method other than landfilling and waste hauling can actually work out to be cheaper. Now that could be cheaper from day one, or that could be, a payback period of a few years where, all the gravy is reaped later down the line. And all that's going to come back again to waste reduction. So, the least amount of waste you have, or the smaller amount of waste you have, the less you're going to pay to have it disposed. So if you are producing avoidable waste, or if you're being inefficient in your purchasing or your production, you're paying to have waste taken off that you purchased, as a raw product or an ingredient, and now you're paying to have it hauled off site. So again, you're wasting money on both sides of that coin. So really, waste reduction is the most affordable way to manage waste. And there's different things that businesses can do to do that. There's different softwares that are standalone that track waste, and then the client disposes of the waste the way they used to. And those are things like Winnow and Lean Path, and there's all kinds of different softwares. There's supermarket softwares specifically for managing inventory, deep discounting, in the last couple of days before it expires, as Devin was talking about. So I think that's the best way to make diversion affordable. Now, the next way, or I think the next thing I want to talk about really depends on your type of business. If you're a golf course, and you have land aplenty and you have need for, fertilizers and land application, uses for biosludge and digestate and compost, then one of the cheapest ways might be to do what Rajiv on the first panel actually talked about, and just set up your own composting and actually use that end product on your own property, like in the golf course for that land application or that fertilizer. So you're taking a waste product that you typically would have paid for. On-site composting yourself is quite affordable, so you're not paying a lot to convert it into a useful product. And then you would have been paying for fertilizers potentially and topsoils and things. So now you actually get to save money there as well with your own product. Menu design, buying ingredients locally, all of that are initiatives that I'm seeing, some of the chefs I work with really go all in on to try and reduce the amount of waste they produce. Then when you look at an on-site technology, so you've got in-vessel composting machines that are like a closed vessel that you put your food waste in, you wait for that process to finish, there's some heat applied and everything. And then when that cycle's finished, you've got your compost product. You've got larger anaerobic digesters. They can be the size of a container. They might work really well for a farm, for a production facility, a packing facility that has a pretty significant amount of waste, and they have the space as well to put one of these large units. They can actually purchase this large anaerobic digester, capitalize that asset, and then actually feed that digester their food waste and convert it into either a gas resource or an electricity resource, which pays for that initial purchase. They're not hauling away their food waste, so there's savings there. So there's a payback. So it's kind of like a capital project for them. Same can apply for aerobic digesters like Orca. Clients can purchase them. Useful life is roughly 8 to 10 years. Amortize that initial cost over that useful life. But what we've done at Orca is we've designed a program called Technology as a Service. So we offer our entire product, the Orca digester, the hardware with the built-in intuitive software and the dashboard for one fixed price. So the client is used to paying a price today to have their waste hauled off site. We can install that digester for them, get it up and running in typically about 30 minutes of delivery. So instant compliance, instant diversion. And that monthly rate that we would charge that client, all in of service and consumables, will typically come in less than what they were paying yesterday for that garbage truck to come and pick up that waste. And that garbage truck was polluting our atmosphere, dumping that food waste into a landfill. The societal effect of having all those garbage trucks on the road. You guys in New York City, all about traffic. I was in Los Angeles. If you look around when you're stuck in that gridlock traffic, 1 in 6 trucks on the road is a garbage truck, and it's typically empty. It's driving to that business empty, hundreds of miles, polluting our atmosphere, causing traffic, ruining our roads, damaging the city infrastructure, just to get somewhere empty. Then it picks up all that waste, charges that client with a big bill, leaves a big messy, loading dock as they pull away. There's garbage leachate dripping down. There's pests attracted to that wet food waste. So there's all those costs associated with waste hauling that is now more expensive than utilizing a sustainable technology like Orca. So it really has become a no-brainer in many cases to implement a sustainable technology than going with the old way, same way we've been doing it for hundreds of years.
Okay, so just a follow-up on that. You mentioned about the garbage trucks, but don't we have some other trash and garbage that we're gonna have a garbage truck come and haul it away anyways? every week. Maybe you can switch it to bi-weekly from weekly or something, right? But so there's still that cost, and wouldn't that be like sometimes become convenient for people and say, why don't we, why waste? Because there's now, you're talking about digester, that's only for food waste, but there's all kinds of trash in a business, especially, right? They're gonna need to have that garbage truck come and do whatever they do anyways. So
that's a great point, Hiren. And it's something that I think legislation and government regulation will drive and quickly change the whole tune of that statement that you just made. However, when you look at certain industry verticals, like I'm going to go back to the grocery store one, over 60% of their waste stream can be food waste. Could be something that could go in a digester. So that's 60% less weight being picked up in their dumpster. That's 60% less lifts of that dumpster potentially, or less pulls or hauls. As you pull food waste out of a compactor, what's left? It's dry goods. It's typically things that don't smell, don't attract pests. So we can go longer in between those pickup scheduled, or that scheduled pickup. And really, a lot of these businesses have invested in compactors to do just that, to compact their waste and reduce the frequency of pickups. But then they go and fill it 60% with food waste that can't last more than a couple days in Florida heat or in California heat before no one wants to go close to that loading dock anymore. So it represents a large percentage of the waste stream that we can actually pull out of those dumpsters, of those bins, of those garbage trucks. So yes, there's still going to be garbage trucks on the road, but our mission at Orca is to take every garbage truck off the road that's moving food waste. And the thing is, as legislation changes and as it becomes policy and regulation to have to divert food waste, that means this client now needs 2 waste streams anyway. So they're going to call their waste hauler. It's been picking up 1 bin. They're going to say, hey, I need you to do my organics now, my compost waste. And the hauler is going to say, sorry, I don't have the capacity for that right now. That could be the first answer. So now this business wants to comply. They want to do the right thing. They want to divert. And their only waste hauler in their area can't even come and pick it up. So what do they do now? They have to look at alternative technologies. The other thing that hauler is going to do is say, okay, no problem. I'll sign you up for our compost program. It's $80 to $100 a ton, and I have to drop off 30 64-gallon totes around your facility that your staff now have to manage, move, store, clean. That whole operational conundrum that becomes, a very real thing because of this multiple management of waste streams now. So we are only taking food waste out of those garbage trucks. You're absolutely correct, Hiren, but we're taking out a large percentage of that volume for areas that can mix all their waste together, and for different regions that are governed by food waste policy and have to divert their food waste, we're helping them avoid that whole new process, that whole new line item on their waste invoice, and that that second visit from a different garbage truck every other day.
Okay, I think we're kind of running out of, well, not running out of time, but before we run out of time, I wanted to bring this up. I know you kind of mentioned, both of you mentioned this already, but we're going to go a little more, maybe if you can go a little more specific about what do you see as the role of government in all this, or what is already there? What do you think, or is there something you would like to see the government play a role in this whole initiative or topic of food waste in general? I know the government is big on environment, but are they actually paying attention to this specific topic? By the way, I did read, just want to read comments from Rajiv. He says, yes, he agrees food waste, 60% of most food waste is compostable. Yes, that is great. So now back to the topic. What about the government role? What do you see, or what would you like to see? I will start with you, Devin.
Sure. So I can really only speak to the New York area in my experience here. The government here has been phasing in within the city over the last few years, diversion compliance rules and regulations based off of the size of your building, the market that you're working in, various factors. And I actually, as a restaurant manager, worked with, not sure if it was an Orca or a competitor, but we did have a food digester on hand, which all of our compostable waste went into that food digester. and we were operating on a very small and tall footprint. So it actually worked out very well for the building. But there is another law or regulation coming in place for the entire state of New York as of 2022 for not just the big city here in Manhattan and surrounding boroughs. So they will be expanding these rules to mostly hospitality, grocery, the big handlers of food as we see them. Hospitals as well, I believe, but don't quote me on that one. I would have to read up in detail. But basically, if you are at a certain capacity, if you are a restaurant with a certain amount of seats, if you're an event space that can host a certain amount of people, or if your building is a certain square footage, while having food services in-house, you then have to follow their compliance. And that relates to options as using food digesters. You could do your own self-sorting, which for some, given the scale, might be more beneficial to them. And there's other avenues that they can take for full waste diversion on the own food waste. So it's definitely coming down the pipeline. I know to a degree this, in California on the West Coast, has been happening as well. I don't know the specifics there because I've never operated there. And then as well, based off of my schooling down in Miami and sort of water pollutants and factories and their disposal of byproducts in the manufacturing of food and goods near the oceans, they're also getting hit with some compliance. So if anything, it's showing that the movement forward is not going to be stopped. And to cite the Deloitte's Millennial and Gen Z survey that they've been doing now for quite a few years, you can see some pretty clear statistics that the rising generations and the people that are filling roles and filling those decision maker roles are going to be much more in tune and already educated on things like sustainability and food waste diversion. And learning about these as full majors and taking them in college, developing concepts and pitching businesses that are fully sustainable are all very commonplace now. So I see the government being able to implement things and regulations that will then be well received by these new generations of educated people, understanding the impact that it's going to have on the world and reshaping their business models ahead of time instead of trying to have to go back and reshape what they've already established, maybe as an older company or a well-established firm. So I think we're definitely, this is speculation, but definitely going to be seeing a shift here. Just as some of the other panelists mentioned, some social issues and topics never being an issue once, and 10 years later, now it's the talk of the town. So I have a feeling and I have faith that the next wave and the new generation coming up, even below me, is going to be more educated than I ever was in early schooling, and will be able to take those principles and practices and really treat them as their core foundation of how we build and execute businesses. So compliance, will affect the older, well-established firms and businesses, I think, that have already have their processes in place. But you'll see a new generation of young people that are entrepreneurs and really framing their entire business around social responsibility.
That's really interesting, Devin, because I definitely have noticed that, when I get an inquiry from a hotel for our technology, for example, sometimes it comes from like the engineering assistant or somebody who's very new to the roles quite early on in their career. And they're the one that's, kickstarting this initiative, opening that door, and then, we move our way up through the ranks. But it's definitely something I've noticed as well. So that's really interesting. For me, I think what I would like to see in terms of legislation and what I think would help, the entire issue of food waste is this needs to go federal. Right now it's state by state. In some cases, it's even city by city. But, some of the businesses that are having the largest impact or producing the most volumes of food waste, they're operating across state lines. They're all over the country. So they might be mandated to do something in one small little city or, in one state for that matter. But the other 90% of their operating, entities are just doing whatever they want. So I think it needs to get to a federal level in order for us to have, significant impact. I think hopefully this isn't the case, but I think if there was too much compliance in one area, these businesses might pack up shop and move somewhere where there isn't compliance or where the cost of disposal is super cheap. And they might see that that's some major savings and it's worth it to do that. So it's got to be federal, it's got to be nationwide, it's got to be one uniform policy, in my opinion. I also think that some rate control needs to be done to drive innovation. So that's going to happen in two ways. One, if the customer, the business has to continue paying a lot to have their waste disposed, they're going to find ways to more efficiently manage it or produce less because they're the ones paying the bill. They want to cut their expenses. So that's all great. But I think where more of the pricing pressure needs to happen is on the waste haulers, is on the traditional waste management companies. I think that, and this happens in some states, I think that the city needs to fix the rate. So there's a ceiling price to what this waste hauler can charge. And what that's going to do is it's going to limit the amount of revenue this hauler can pull from that client. It's going to force them to become more efficient, to find better ways to handle waste, more efficient routes, fill trucks more, because they can only collect maximum $100 per ton from this customer. So they need to find ways to be profitable, be more efficient under $100 a ton. So I think fixing the cost of what these haulers can charge will drive innovation at the waste management level. And like I said before, we've been carting waste and digging holes in the ground for hundreds of years. It's the very first waste management plan that was ever invented, outside of chucking it in the sea, which we don't do anymore. But we were doing that, as soon as the wheel was invented. We had horses pulling carts full of garbage and taking it as far away as we could handle and burying it in the ground. And we're still doing that today. We have smartphones, we have cell phones, private companies are going to space and we're still driving diesel trucks and burying our garbage in the hole. Population is increasing, waste is only going to increase as developing nations start spending more of their money going on luxury travel. The hotel industry is going to have more buffets. Waste is just going to keep growing. We've got to find more efficient ways to produce it, and the government needs to get on board.
There can be no more impactful, powerful visual image to end this morning's summit than what you just laid out, Robert.
Thank you.
And so
Yes,
thank you for that.
Yes, I was going to say that. That horses, and so sorry, horses carrying garbage.
Right.
That image in my head, I'm thinking about it now. It's like, what would that look like, or what did it look like back in the day? But that was kind of.
It looks like a Monty Python skit, Bring Us Your Dead. And so yes. Thank you for that, Robert. This panel has been the perfect cap to a wonderful morning. It ended with a discussion about legislation and government. And I believe Robert is probably right. At the state and local levels, it's too fragmented. But we also know historically that governments of any nature, especially in the most recent era, follow the people, not lead. And the reason why Day and Nite, family of companies, and Total Food Service kicked off this inaugural Sustainability and Food Waste Summit is in recognition that we, the people, as an industry, really are the ones that have the dynamic capacity to initiate the necessary change. Mm-hmm. This morning's program was designed to provide some useful, practical education, but more importantly, to stimulate that community, to stimulate a community that recognizes some of the very important things that we heard today. And that includes the changing habits for consumers, changing behaviors and demand for consumers should, as an economic matter, accelerate the changing habits with purpose within every business. What we heard today are very memorable lines, particularly about sustainability is a new and efficient way to do business, which gives a competitive advantage over those that are inefficient or are still operating in, as Robert so eloquently stated, the horse carrying the buggy of garbage to somewhere distant from where we are. Incredible. If we will reflect back on each of the presenters today and so much what we've learned, not as a destination, but as a start. In follow-up to this morning's summit, every one of the registered participants will receive a link to the rebroadcast. not only to refresh your memories, but please distribute it liberally to anyone you know. Distribute it liberally to your peers in the industry or beyond. Without a grassroots concerted effort to do the right things, we will be back at these same conversations time and time again. In the most recent decade or so, every year opens up the same. A team of esteemed client experts and scientists say, yes, global warming is coming, it's coming fast, it's real. And somewhere in the middle part of every year, that same group of scientists and esteemed professionals say, no, we were wrong. It's actually coming much faster. And in fact, it's not coming anymore. It's here. Matt opened up this morning by talking about some of the wild weather phenomena. I know that it is mid-October. I know later on this afternoon, they will play a baseball game at Comiskey Park in Chicago, and it's supposed to be 75 degrees. 75 degrees in Chicago in October isn't supposed to happen. I know on the weather reports up and down the East Coast this morning, they talked about the humidity in the fall in the Northeast. That's not supposed to happen. The first major snowstorm is coming through the Upper Rockies, which maybe is supposed to happen, but not to this dimension and not this early. And if we go continent by continent, we see the same thing. The evidence is clear. The need for taking action is upon us. And no industry has historically proven itself to be more active with purpose to get things done than hospitality. And so for those that were able to participate partially over the 3 hours this morning or hung with the entire thing, please, let's start here and let's keep building as a community. On behalf of the moderators, panelists, the Day and Night family of companies, I want to thank you for your engagement, some of the great questions, certainly some of the great back and forth engagement we saw in the chats, but let's build from this. And thank you all very much. I look forward to working with you with purpose going forward.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
It's nicely done.
All those chat notes, all those chat notes, are those recorded?
I should save them all, yeah.
Yeah, because that Melissa was pumping a lot of political information. So it's great. Well done. Well done. Well done. What, with the 10 pen?
Well, weird still. Well, coming through for some reason.
Yeah. I guess that makes it real, right?
Yeah.
Other than that, I thought the way you structured it with them, the way they